Chapter 1002. The battle between the Guanzhong torture room and the Imperial Guard was also a great loss. Looking at Chu Wuji's complexion, he had also suffered some injuries. Chu Xiu handed over a bottle of elixir and asked, "How serious is the injury? Where is Elder Wei?" Chu Wuji took the elixir and shook his head. "It's not too serious. Elder Wei should have gone to Wei County, which is also the main point of Eastern Qi's attack. But 3 of the 5 armies of Eastern Qi and the masters of the Imperial Worship Hall are already there, so it should be much easier." After saying that, Chu Wuji sighed and said, "Your current strength is probably infinitely close to the mysterious realm of heaven and earth, isn't it? The combination of true fire-tempering spirit and true fire-tempering body is really terrifying. I even want to give it a try." Of course, Chu Wuji was just saying it. He would be crazy to try such a thing. The true fire-tempering body could not be practiced without great perseverance. The success of Chu Xiu's cultivation was largely due to luck. If others were like him, being blasted into pieces and still not dying, it was possible for them to cultivate the true fire-tempering body after their body was reconstructed. The mysterious realm of heaven and earth is not so easy to deal with. At our level, each step is a different heaven. The difference between clouds and mud is not so easy to surpass. Chu Wuji said, "But in my opinion, you have at least crossed the half-heaven." After a few words of greeting, Chu Wuji directly followed Chu Xiu into Guanzhong City. Xiao Yi and the others were counting the losses of the Guanzhong torture room. When they saw Chu Xiu, they all bowed respectfully. Chu Yuanqing also saw Chu Xiu. He looked a little embarrassed because he did not know how to address Chu Xiu. Although he already knew that Chu Xiu was using him, Chu Yuanqing did not really hate Chu Xiu. After all, his interests had not been harmed, and even his father's position had returned to him. The power of the Guanzhong torture room was also greater than before. Back then he was Chu Xiu's big brother. But now, Chu Xiu was no longer the Jianghu arrester of the Guanzhong torture room. He was a giant of the diabolism, an ambitious and ruthless figure who controlled the entire northern Yan martial world. It could even be said that his father was not as strong as Chu Xiu at his peak. Back when Chu Kuanga had fought against Divine Lord Luo of Tianmen, he had only managed to seriously injure Divine Lord Luo by sacrificing his own life. But now Chu Xiu could already kill an Elysium Divine General. This was the difference between them. Before Chu Yuanqing could say anything, Chu Xiu walked over first, cupped his hands and said, "Big brother, how have you been? This time, I came late. If I had come earlier, maybe the cities of the Guanzhong torture room would not have been lost." Seeing that Chu Xiu's attitude towards him was almost the same as before, Chu Yuanqing also breathed a sigh of relief, and even looked a little touched. "Brother Chu, you don't have to blame yourself. You came at the right time. In fact, the Guanzhong torture room did not lose anything. Previously, we knew that with the strength of the Guanzhong torture room, it was basically a mantis trying to stop a chariot when faced with the army of Eastern Qi. So when the army of Eastern Qi first arrived, we had already withdrawn our men. The cities that Eastern Qi occupied were just empty cities. Moreover, the Eastern Qi also wanted to completely occupy Guanzhong, so they did not make things difficult for some of the martial arts forces or other people in the cities. Chu Xiu nodded and said, "That's good. After we finish counting the casualties, let's go to the meeting. The retreat of the Imperial Guards does not mean that we are safe. Eastern Qi does not only have one Imperial Guard." An hour later, all the higher-ups of the Guanzhong torture room and Chu Wuji came to the meeting hall. Chu Yuanqing wanted Chu Xiu to sit in the main seat, but Chu Xiu refused. With his current status, he no longer needed to sit in the main seat to win status and respect. In fact, with Chu Xiu's current strength, the Guanzhong torture room was dispensable to him. Chu Yuanqing did not betray him in the past, so naturally, he would not betray Chu Yuanqing. So as long as he was alive, the Guanzhong torture room would always have the surname Chu. Secretly, the surname was Chu Xiu, and publicly, the surname was Chu Yuanqing. Moreover, Chu Xiu also admired Chu Kuanga, Chu Juxia. But admiration was just admiration. Chu Xiu would be Chu Kuanga for the rest of his life. "How are the casualties in the Guanzhong torture room?" Chu Xiu asked. Xiao Yi said in a deep voice, "More than 3,000 people died, and 10,000 were injured." In such a battle, the Guanzhong torture room does not have the upper hand. After that, Xiaoyi looked up at Chu Xiu carefully and said, "My lord, can the Northern Yan send reinforcements over?" Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "It's very difficult. The Northern Yan's strength is obvious, and the 5 armies of the state have already been sent out. If we were to transfer more troops, we would have to transfer the royal guard stationed around the Yanjing city to protect the palace." The expressions of the martial artists in the Guanzhong torture room changed. Without reinforcements, how could they defend the Guanzhong torture room? Don't think that the Guanzhong torture room was strong before, but this was a war between nations. A powerful army built with the strength of a nation was not something that the Guanzhong torture room could withstand. However, Chu Xiu suddenly said, "We can't get reinforcements from the Northern Yan, but we can think of a way to change the target for the Eastern Qi and Northern Yan." The Guanzhong torture room is not the main place. Wei County has Jiangshan Pavilion as the front line, and the border between the Northern Yan and Eastern Qi is also a place that both sides will fight for. The Guanzhong torture room is actually dispensable to the Eastern Qi. Xiaoyi smiled bitterly and said, "But the problem now is, how can we make the Eastern Qi change their mind?" Chu Xiu thought about it and knocked on the table, saying, "The Guanzhong torture room has been the center of trade between the 3 nations for so many years. You torture officers must have been involved in smuggling, right?" The expressions of Xiao Yi and the others changed slightly. Chu Xiu waved his hand casually and said, "Don't be nervous. Back when I was a torture officer in the Guanzhong torture room, I also did this kind of thing. Every man for himself will be destroyed by heaven and earth. Who can avoid such a lucrative business? All of you have been in the Guanzhong torture room longer than me. For so many years, have there been any Eastern Qi bigwigs, royalty, and the like who interfered in the smuggling business? Can you contact them?" Xiaoyi nodded and said, "Yes, we can contact them. But Lord, this is the time of war between the Eastern Qi and the Northern Yan. Even if we can contact them, they won't dare to interfere." Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "Don't worry, you just need to contact them. As long as the benefits are enough, it's not like they won't betray their country. You just need to contact them according to what I said. I won't show myself since my identity is sensitive, but I will tell you what to say in secret." Hearing Chu Xiu's words, although Xiaoyi was still puzzled, he could only nod and agree. After so many years in the Guanzhong torture room, Xiao Yi and the others had accumulated a lot of connections. If the people in the Eastern Qi wanted to smuggle things to the Northern Yan and West Chu, they would have to sneak in with small caravans. Big caravans would have to get through to the inspectors. And for some extremely sensitive things, they had to get through to the torture officers. So Xiao Yi and the others knew quite a few of the powerful people in the Eastern Qi imperial court. But at this critical moment, these people didn't want to see Xiao Yi. But Chu Xiu's method was very rough. He directly threatened them that if they didn't come, he would hand over the evidence of their smuggling to the Eastern Qi imperial court, especially the contraband they had smuggled to the Northern Yan. So although this group of people was angry, they still came obediently. Of course, they weren't stupid enough to enter the territory of the Guanzhong torture room. Instead, they found a place where the Eastern Qi and the Guanzhong torture room intersected to meet with Xiao Yi. In an inn in a small town, Xiao Yi had booked the entire inn. Sitting across from him were several people dressed in luxurious clothes. There were old and young people, but all of them had angry expressions on their faces. One of them said coldly, "Lord Xiao, this is not what you did. We have worked together so many times before. Even if we can't do business, we can still be friends. You followed Chu Xiu and the Northern Yan, but now that you are being pressured by the army, you implicated us. What is the meaning of this?" Xiaoyi knew the identity of the people in front of him. They were all nobles in the Eastern Qi, and some were even royalty. For example, the person in front of him was Lu Changlong, Duke Huai of the Eastern Qi. He belonged to the collateral royal family. Although he was conferred the title of duke, he didn't have any real power. So he spent most of his time making money and enjoying himself. Xiaoyi waved his hand and said, "Everyone, please calm down. None of you want to see me. I have no other choice. That's why I came up with this trick. Now everyone should know the predicament of the Guanzhong torture room. This time, I am here to ask for your help." Lu Chonglong and the others shook their heads quickly and said, "Don't, Lord Xiao. You know our background. How can we have a say in such a big matter?" Xiao Yi laughed and said, "Everyone here is a famous person in the Eastern Qi Imperial Court. Why can't you have a say in this? Don't worry. Since we are asking for help, the Guanzhong torture room will naturally show our sincerity. When the Guanzhong torture room calms down, I won't take a single cent from the things you want to smuggle in the future. And as long as you agree to help the Guanzhong torture room once, everything here will belong to you." As he spoke, Xiao Yi opened a secret space box. Inside was a mountain of gold, silver, and jewelry. Although these things weren't very useful to martial artists, they were still real money. Chu Xiu wanted to bribe them with these things, which made Xiao Yi's heart ache. Seeing these things, Lu Chonglong and the others were tempted. But they still shook their heads and said, "Although money is good, the Guanzhong torture room is on the side of the Northern Yen. Helping you is equivalent to selling out the country. The money from selling out the country isn't easy to earn." At this moment, Xiao Yi heard Chu Xiu's voice. He was stunned for a moment, then he asked with a smile, "Let me ask you a question. Do you think that the Northern Yen can swallow up the Eastern Qi?" Everyone at the scene immediately burst into laughter. LV Chonglong disdainfully said, "Our great Qi sits on the rich and populous land of the Central Plains. There are many heroes and heroes. Even if His Majesty makes a few consecutive mistakes, those barbarians of Northern Yen will not be able to swallow up great Qi." Xiao Yi smiled and said, "If that's the case, then why are you worried about selling out the country? Not to mention that the Guanzhong torture room is only doing this for self-preservation. Even if we really want you to sell out the country, Eastern Qi won't have any problems, right? If that's the case, what's the big deal about selling out once in a while?" Chapter 1003. Chu Xiu had always believed that there were people in this world who could stick to their principles, but more of them were those who were willing to betray their own lives for the sake of profit. These people even cared about their own lives, not to mention betraying their country. If there was enough profit, what was the big deal about betraying their country once in a while? The words that Chu Xiu had asked Xiao Yi to say could be said to be aimed at the hearts of everyone present. After all, it was just a small favor. Moreover, with their influence, they could not affect the real strategy of Eastern Qi. Even if the Northern Yen really won this time, with the strength of Northern Yen, they would not be able to annex Eastern Qi. In that case, what were they afraid of? Lu Chonglong was the first to laugh. "We are old friends with Lord Xiao. If the Guanzhong torture room falls, it will affect our business in the future, won't it? I will do my part in this matter." With Lu Chonglong taking the lead, the others also spoke up and accepted the gifts from the Guanzhong torture room with peace of mind. The nobles of Eastern Qi, such as Lu Chonglong, were either useless royals with no real power or talent in martial arts, or some useless nobles who had made great contributions during the founding of the country, but could only sit around and wait for death. They might not be of much use when dealing with official business, but they were very good at this kind of betrayal. Therefore, after returning to Eastern Qi, they discussed among themselves and took turns to offer Lu Haochang many good things. What did Lu Haochang like? It was nothing more than women, and some rare playthings. Some offered stunning beauties that they had carefully cultivated, and some offered divine birds that they had caught from the 100,000 mountains. They looked like owls with green feathers and red beaks. They were docile and eloquent. Lu Haochang did not refuse any of these gifts. He accepted them and comforted Nangong Weiyu, who had lost the battle, and asked him to rest. He simply forgot about the Guanzhong torture room. In fact, Lu Haochang was not an idiot. He had been an emperor for so many years. Although he was mediocre, he was not muddle-headed. These guys suddenly offered him so many beauties and treasures. If they did not have any ulterior motives, Lu Haochang would never believe it. Therefore, he had secretly investigated and found out that these guys had a smuggling business in the Guanzhong torture room. That was why they were worried that the Guanzhong torture room would be destroyed. But after knowing this, Lu Haochang did not expose them, nor did he punish them. Instead, he pretended not to know and happily accepted their gifts, satisfying their requests. If the water was too clear, there would be no fish. As long as the Eastern Qi was safe, why should he care so much? Moreover, if he really cut off their business, they would all be so poor. How could they offer him so many beauties and treasures the next time there was a problem? Lu Haocheng's seemingly stupid approach saved the Guanzhong torture room. The troops that the Eastern Qi had stationed around the Guanzhong torture room were all withdrawn. This allowed the Guanzhong torture room to finally heave a sigh of relief. Although the Guanzhong torture room was fine, Chu Xiu was not in a hurry to return to the northern Yan country. The victory or defeat of one place could not determine the direction of the whole war. In fact, Chu Xiu was also having a headache now. Things had developed to the stage of the national war. It was no longer something that could be solved by killing one or two people. Even if Chu Xiu was given a chance to kill Ling Yunzi, the supreme expert of the metaphysic realm of heaven and earth, it would be useless. Most of the orthodox sects in the Eastern Qi country had taken action. Some of them really wanted to eliminate the evil and defend the Tao, while some were doing it for the interests of all parties. And there was also the Eastern Qi imperial court. Once they started, not to mention the death of Ling Yunzi, even if the whole Chunyang Dao sect was destroyed, the Eastern Qi imperial court would not stop. The national war was not a child's play. Chu Xiu could not sit back and watch the northern Yan country perish, nor could he watch his own interests suffer. So now, he really had to think of a way to break out of this situation. After staying in the Guanzhong torture room for 2 days, Chu Xiu pondered a lot. He looked around, but there was really no power that he could borrow. In fact, Chu Xiu still had some connections in the Jianghu. For example, he was on good terms with Xie Xiaolu. He could totally pay some price to ask for help from Chen Qingdi's Heaven Alliance. But unfortunately, the Heaven Alliance could not affect the situation of the war. If Chen Qingdi was a metaphysic realm expert, it would be better. As for the Eastern Qi country, he could also ask the Mo family to help, but the strength of the Mo family of Shangyang was basically dispensable. So after thinking for a long time, since he could not find help from the Central Plains warriors, why not look a little further, such as overseas? He thought of overseas because of the Jiangshan Pavilion. Since ancient times, although the overseas martial arts world and the Central Plains warriors were connected, there was little communication between the two sides. The strength of the overseas martial arts world might not be as strong as the Central Plains warriors, but it was definitely not weak. The overseas martial arts world was able to cultivate people like Kong Dongming. There was also the Jiangshan Pavilion, which had been hunted down like a stray dog. It was also because of the resources of the overseas martial arts world that they could rise again. There was also Zhong Xinxiu. Strictly speaking, he was also an overseas martial artist. Everyone knew the name of the East Sea Unrestrained Sky. Although they did not know whether the so-called East Sea Unrestrained Sky was an island or something else. Since the word East Sea was added, it was definitely overseas. With such a strong force by his side, why not borrow it? Although Chu Xiu did not know the situation of the overseas martial arts world, there were people who did, such as the Sixth Demon Sect. Although the Sixth Demon Sect was far away in the South Sea, the South Sea and the East Sea were both seas. Chu Xiu believed that there must be some understanding between them. Moreover, the reason why Chu Xiu went to the Sixth Demon Sect was to test whether or not the Sixth Demon Sect would intervene in this matter. This matter had already evolved into a war between the righteous and demonic sects. It had even reached the point where the three countries were fighting each other. The disturbance was already quite big. The bright demons and the hidden demons had already made their move, but the Sixth Demon Sect, a neutral existence, was still missing. After instructing Chu Yuansheng and the others to act as usual, but to be careful, Chu Xiu went all the way to the Sixth Demon Sect in the South Sea. The Sixth Demon Sect was only close to the South Sea, but it was actually on a strange island next to the South Sea coast. It was strange because the island was surrounded by a formation. Even if an ordinary person wanted to find it, they would not be able to. Of course, Chu Xiu was not an ordinary person. He wanted to meet the people of the Sixth Demon Sect, so he directly released his aura in the sea. An hour later, Yibuoshuan immediately came out with some people to personally welcome him. Your esteemed sect is truly fortunate to have Master Chu here. Come. Let's enter the sect and welcome Master Chu before we talk about anything else. Yi Buoxuan's attitude was very courteous, but there was a trace of falsehood in that courteousness. Chu Xiu said with a smile that was not a smile. Master Yi, you and I can be considered old acquaintances. There's no need to play such tricks, right? You should know why I'm here. You also know that I don't have the energy to attend a banquet. The northern Yan side is on fire. Yi Buoxuan smiled bitterly. Official Chu, it's not that the sixth demon sect does not want to help, but we are in the South Sea. The South Sea is close to the southern barbarians. When the news came, do you know who came? Chu Xiu's heart stirred. Rama. Yi Buoxuan smiled bitterly. It's Rama. Damn, the other party couldn't find the location of the sixth demon sect, so he directly branded a Buddhist seal on the sea. That power was like burning the sky and boiling the sea. One Buddhist seal evaporated who knows how much seawater. For a whole 3 days, the sixth demon sect was shrouded in mist. My sixth heavenly demon sect hasn't even made a move yet, but Rama has already come to warn us. If my sixth heavenly demon sect really makes a move, I reckon that before we can even reach northern Yan, we will be dealt with by the people from Sabodhi Monastery. Chu Xiu frowned slightly. This was the current situation in the pugilistic world. The righteous and the demonic were entangled. The righteous martial artists in West Chu wanted to make a move, but he found the moon-worshipping sect to stop them. In the south, the sixth demon sect also wanted to help, but they were threatened by the Sabodhi Monastery. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, I know Master Yi's difficulties, so this time, I don't expect the sixth demon sect to make a move. I came to find you, Master Yi, to ask for a small favor. Hearing that Chu Xiu didn't force the sixth demon sect to make a move, Yi Buoxuan let out a sigh of relief. He asked, What does official Chu want from me? It's very simple. I want you to accompany me to the East Sea, Master Yi. There's no hope for the Central Plains warriors for the time being, so I want to borrow the power of the overseas martial artists to deal a fatal blow to the Eastern Qi. As long as the Eastern Qi retreats, everything will be easy to solve. However, I don't know much about the overseas forces, so I can only ask for your help, Master Yi. The South Sea and the East Sea are both seas. As for the overseas forces, it's more reliable to find someone like Master Yi who is familiar with them. Yi Buoxuan smiled bitterly. The South Sea and the East Sea are very different. However, I have been to the East Sea several times. Although I don't know much about it, I have a general understanding. It's possible to go with official Chu this time. However, official Chu, I still advise you to be more cautious. Even if you go to the East Sea, it's very likely that you'll return empty-handed. The overseas martial artists rarely get involved in the affairs of the Central Plains. If you want them to rashly come to the Central Plains and make an enemy of a big country like the Eastern Qi, it'll be very difficult. Chu Xiu squinted and said, They didn't come before because they didn't have enough benefits. Jiangshan Pavilion is doing well in the overseas forces. Why do they want to return to the Central Plains now? Isn't it because they have enough benefits? Master Yi, just lead the way. I'll take care of everything else. Even if it's difficult, we still have to try. If we don't try, how will we know it's not possible? Since Chu Xiu didn't want to listen to his advice, he didn't say much. He just took it as a wasted trip. The overseas martial arts world and the Central Plains warriors were basically two different regions. Although Chu Xiu had a great reputation among the Central Plains warriors, it might not be effective in the overseas forces. Chapter 1004. The East Sea was very different from the South Sea. The biggest difference was the number of people. There were many storms in the South Sea, the climate was hot, and the environment was harsh. Therefore, the powers that could take root in the South Sea were all relatively strong, like the sixth demon sect, so their numbers were naturally much lower. The East Sea, on the other hand, had a pleasant climate and abundant heaven-earth yuan qi. There were countless islands of various sizes, including commoners and martial artists. A long time ago, someone had even established a country in the East Sea. Unfortunately, there were too many variables in the East Sea, and they didn't last long before being destroyed. At present, a portion of the East Sea's powers were in the hands of sects and aristocratic families, while the other portion was in the hands of individual powerhouses. They controlled an island and became lords, but they usually didn't last long. There were very few that could last for 3 generations, and those that could last for more than 3 generations would naturally become sects or aristocratic families. For the sake of speed, Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan directly took a boat to the East Sea. The 6th heavenly demon sex ship was reinforced by a formation, so its speed in the sea was faster than that of a martial artist at the true fire spirit refinement realm. Most importantly, it saved energy and didn't need to stop. Otherwise, even if a true fire spirit refinement realm martial artist could draw in the power of heaven and earth for their own use, they still wouldn't be able to walk on the water for a long time. As they neared the East Sea, Chu Xiu asked, "Mastery, in the East Sea, who is the most powerful and influential person?" Yi Buoxuan said, "Official Chu wants to make a move on the most influential person? That's not a bad idea. The East Sea has as many islands as there are hairs on an ox, and the various powers are also as numerous as hairs on an ox. However, the strongest person in the East Sea isn't actually the most influential. This is different from the Central Plains." Chu Xiu was surprised. "Oh, why?" Yi Buoxuan shook his head. "I'm not too sure, but it's been like this for tens of thousands of years. Perhaps it's because the martial artists born in the East Sea saw the boundless ocean when they were born. Their hearts yearned for the heavens and earth, but they yearned for power. Therefore, over the years, the most powerful people in the East Sea were all martial arts fanatics, and it was rare to see them. For example, the current #1 unrestrained Sky Lord Zhong Shinxiu was such a person. Everyone only knew that he lived in the deepest part of the East Sea, but no one had ever seen him before. And that sword saint of the East Sea, Kong Dongming. Official Chu, you should have dealt with him before and know his strength. This guy is the same." Chu Xiu muttered, "In that case, none of the most powerful people in the East Sea are in the heaven and earth elemental enlightenment realm." Yi Buoxuan nodded and said, "That's right. Moreover, the land of the Eastern Sea was roughly divided into 2 regions. One was the sea near the Eastern Qi land, called the Breezy Sea. There were many islands there, and the wind and waves were relatively mild. It was more suitable for the common people and martial artists to live in. The deeper part of the sea was called the Breezy Sea. There were often howling winds and waves, and the smaller islands would be submerged. Only the truly large islands and powerful martial artists could survive there. The environment there was even worse than in the South Sea. Therefore, Official Chu basically didn't have to consider the forces in the Breezy Sea. The forces on the large islands there were self-sufficient, and they were too far away from Eastern Qi. They wouldn't be easily moved. There were many forces in the Breezy Sea, and most of them had trade with Eastern Qi. Some even traveled between the Central Plains and overseas. These people are worth considering." "Then who is the strongest person in the Breezy Sea?" "Supreme Island Lord, Godai Huoxingzuan, the 5th Lord Hua." Yi Buoxuan didn't even hesitate and spat out the name. "He's very strong. And his force is also very strong?" Since he dared to name his island Supreme Island, was he really going to be the master of the overseas region? At this moment, a strange expression appeared on Yi Buoxuan's face as he said, "Although he is also at the true fire spirit refinement realm, his strength isn't too great. Not to mention the fact that he's already old. Even when he was young, he was still a mediocre person in the same realm. At the very least, I don't fear him at all. Strictly speaking, his force isn't very strong. There aren't many forces that belong to him, but the forces that are indirectly related to him can dominate the Breezy Sea." Chu Xiu suddenly became interested in this 5th Lord Hua. The composition of the overseas region is quite interesting. Someone like this can dominate a sea region as large as the Breezy Sea? Yi Buoxuan said, "The main reason why Huoxingzuan has the power he has today is because of his foresight. Huoxingzuan's nickname is God's Eye. This God's Eye doesn't refer to the fact that he cultivates some kind of eye technique that can shock the world and make the gods weep. Instead, it refers to the way he looks at people. Moreover, people call him 5th Master Hua not because he ranks 5th, but because he has 5 godson." At this point, Yi Buoxuan clicked his tongue and sighed. "When I first heard about this, even I sighed. This 5th Master Hua was either a grandmaster proficient in the Tao of divination, or he really had some kind of treasure on him. His eyes were simply too divine." None of Huoxingzuan's descendants are successful, but he has adopted 5 godson, and all of them are dragons and phoenixes among men. His eldest godson, sword maniac Qiu Tianya, is a master in the way of the sword. 50 years ago, he had already stepped into the true fire spirit refinement realm, and was invincible in the breezy sea. If Kong Dongming had been born 50 years earlier, the title of Sword Saint of the Eastern Sea would not have fallen on his head. However, Qiu Tianya was a sword maniac and liked to test his swordsmanship. There was no one in the breezy sea who could match him, so he went to the Windbreaker Sea. It was said that he defeated several island lords of the large islands. In the end, he even went to challenge Zhong Xinxiu. However, there was no trace of him since then. Many people said that even if he did not die at the hands of Zhong Xinxiu, he was buried in the Boundless Sea region. Hua Xingzuan's second godson is the island lord of Divine Weapon Island. He is at the peak of the true fire spirit refinement realm, and is known as the #1 general of the Eastern Sea, Bailey Pobbing. He uses his body to fight against divine weapons. Divine Weapon Island is not a place for forging divine weapons, but for burying divine weapons. His third godson is the largest fleet in the Eastern Sea, the master of the Blue Dragon Fleet, Fu Longxiao. He is at the peak of the true fire spirit refinement realm. In the entire Breezy Sea, only his Blue Dragon Fleet can safely travel between the Breezy Sea and the Windbreaker Sea without a single accident. His fourth godson is Nayland Hai. He is also at the true fire spirit refinement realm. However, he is a bit unlucky. In his early years, he had a conflict with Kong Dongming. As a result, his legs were cut off by Kong Dongming. Now he is living in seclusion on a small island. A true fire spirit refinement realm martial artist without legs. Although his cultivation is still there, his combat power will be greatly reduced. As for his fifth godson, you should know about Official Chu. He is the current pavilion master of Jiangshan Pavilion, Zhao Yuanfeng. I heard that he has become the regent of Wei country. When Jiangshan Pavilion first came to the overseas region, it was basically a stray dog. It even had a conflict with some overseas forces, including the forces under the 5th Lord Hua. Zhao Yuanfeng was still very young at that time. He was not the person in charge of Jiangshan Pavilion yet. However, he dared to go to the Supreme Island alone to negotiate with the 5th Lord Hua. He was valued by the 5th Lord Hua. Not only did he end the conflict between them, but he also recognized Zhao Yuanfeng as his godson. The reason why Jiangshan Pavilion is able to establish itself in the overseas region is not only because of Zhao Yuanfeng's efforts, but also because of the 5th Lord Hua's reputation. Chu Xiu was shocked when he heard Yi Buoxuan telling him about the 5th Lord Hua. He had never heard of such a person before. He was lucky to have a big shot as his godson. However, if he was lucky to have 5 godson, then the 5th Lord Hua's luck must be off the charts. It was no wonder people called him the God's Eye. His ability to judge people was almost godly. However, Chu Xiu suddenly thought of something. He said in surprise, I remember that Kong Dongming used to be a guest of Jiangshan Pavilion. He even crippled the leg of Hua Xingzuan's third godson. They must have a deep grudge against each other. Why would Jiangshan Pavilion still dare to use him? Yi Buoxuan chuckled and said, Official Chu, you fought with Kong Dongming before. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he's the strongest person in the Jianghu below the metaphysic realm of heaven and earth, right? Chu Xiu nodded. That kind of monster was certainly not an exaggeration. He was the only freak he had ever seen who could step into the metaphysic realm of heaven and earth, but did not take the initiative to do so. Yi Buoxuan spread his hands and said, In the entire Breezy Sea, Kong Dongming is almost invincible. The 5 godson of Hua Xingzuan are indeed strong, but they can't do anything to the powerful Kong Dongming, who has no desires. Fighting him to the death would be the worst deal. Moreover, Zhao Yuanfeng was only Hua Xingzuan's godson, not his biological son. Therefore, they didn't have much of a relationship with Nayland Hai. For a godson they had no relationship with. Exchanging an almost invincible guest of the Breezy Sea, which was a good deal. Of course, in the entire Breezy Sea at that time, only Zhao Yuanfeng dared to use Kong Dongming as a guest. Zhao Yuanfeng was Hua Xingzuan's 5th godson, so he didn't have to worry too much. However, the other forces were afraid of offending Nayland Hai and the 5th Lord Hua. Therefore, even if Kang Dongming took the initiative to come to them, they wouldn't dare to use him. Chu Xiu nodded in understanding. While they were talking, the giant ship had already arrived in the East Sea, heading straight for the largest island in the East Sea, Haotian Island. Haotian Island was the largest island in the entire East Sea, including the Breezy Sea and the Foam-splitting Sea. It was like a small piece of land. Haotian Island didn't belong to any force. Everyone could come to the island to trade, live, and so on. More than 10 famous Jianghu masters of the Breezy Sea and the major forces sent some elites to form an alliance to maintain the basic order of Haotian Island. Yi Buoxuan brought Chu Xiu to Haotian Island first to inquire about the news. After all, he was from the South Sea. It had been several years since he last came to the East Sea. He didn't know if the situation in the East Sea had changed. Chapter 1005. As soon as Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan arrived on Haotian Island, they could feel the difference between this place and the Central Plains warriors. The biggest difference was not the attire, language, etc., but the atmosphere. Most of the Central Plains warriors were from sects and aristocratic families. Most of the people who came and went were also in cliques. Moreover, in the East Sea, sects and aristocratic families were a part of it. There were also some islands that were loosely allied. There were also many independent martial artists who came and went between the islands. Therefore, it became a spectacle. Almost everywhere, you could see martial artists trading all kinds of natural treasures, and even secret manuals of martial arts. Some of the things that the Central Plains warriors thought couldn't be taught casually could be bought here as long as you could pay the right price. Naturally, information was also available. Moreover, the overseas anemophilia didn't have any integrity. At least the wind-sweeping tower would be a little particular. Some secret items would only be sold to one person. Moreover, in the overseas region, as long as you could afford it, they wouldn't dare to say anything. Chu Xiu followed Yi Buoxuan to a long street on Haotian Island. They found a shop with a sign hanging on it and walked in directly. There were many people inside asking for all kinds of information. Chu Xiu looked around and said faintly, "Do you have a private room?" "Yes, yes." A crafty-looking martial artist immediately came forward and flattered Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan into a private room. He only had the strength of the innate realm. Naturally, he couldn't see through Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan's realm. However, in the anemophilia trade, whether it was the Central Plains warriors or overseas, it depended on their eyesight. Anyway, with his eyesight, these two were not ordinary people. "What kind of information do you need?" Chu Xiu said indifferently. "All the major news that happened in the cool breeze sea in the past few years." The wind medium said awkwardly, "You're making things difficult for me. The breeze sea is so big, and from our anemophilia's point of view, there are major events happening every day. What level are these major events?" Chu Xiu didn't say anything. He took out an ingot of purple gold and threw it on the table. Seeing that ingot of purple gold, the wind medium's eyes immediately lit up, and he put it into his bosom. He took out a thick book from somewhere and said, "What information do you want?" "I have it here." Purple gold was something that was extremely rare in the outer seas. There were very few purple gold mines in the outer seas. Even if there were, a portion of it was under the sea, and it was extremely difficult to mine it. Therefore, the purchasing power of purple gold in the outer seas was much higher than in the Central Plains. Chu Xiu was so generous. He could even find information from 100 years ago, not to mention all the news that happened in the past few years. Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan flipped through the book for a while, and they more or less understood the situation in the outer seas. Compared to the ups and downs of the Central Plains warriors, the outer seas was still relatively peaceful. Hua Xingzuan had a great reputation in the outer seas. In addition, he had a few foster sons. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that his supreme island was the supreme island of the outer seas. Everyone else lived under such authority and rules. Naturally, they wouldn't be able to cause any trouble. Yi Bo-sun closed the book and said, "This fifth master Hua will be celebrating his 380th birthday in a few days. He is also a person who loves to show off and has a lively personality. Every few years, he will hold a birthday celebration, and call his adopted son as well as all the major powers in the cool breeze sea to come, and have a good time. It can be said that this is the time when all the forces in the breezy sea are gathered. On such an occasion, official Chu, if you can get the support of the fifth Lord Hua and gather all the forces in the breezy sea, it might be possible. Hearing what Yi Buoxuan said, Chu Xiu's expression was a little strange. This Hua Xingzuan was already 380 years old. There weren't many true fire spirit refinement realm martial artists who could live to this age. In theory, a martial artist in the true fire spirit refinement realm had a lifespan of 400 years, but this was only in theory. Once a martial artist in this realm passed the age of 200, his body would begin to decline. In fact, at 300 years old, one could already feel that they were close to the end of their lifespan. It was already very rare for someone to survive 300 years old and still have the strength to fight, like the Chunyang Dao sect's Mako Mori. This fifth Lord Hua was already close to 400 years old, but he was still able to go through so much trouble. He could be considered to have lived a long life. Yi Buoxuan seemed to have seen through Chu Xiu's doubts. He smiled and said, ever since his eldest foster son, Xiu Tianya, became famous, the fifth Lord Hua almost never fought with anyone. Later on, he took in 4 foster sons in a row. Do you think he still has the chance to fight with others? Chu Xiu nodded in understanding. This was very reasonable. This fifth master Hua had lived like a prince for such a long time. With his 5 adopted sons around, he could practically do as he pleased in the entire cool breeze sea. Without the opportunity to fight to the death with others, he naturally did not have as many internal injuries in his body. It was normal for him to have a longer lifespan. However, Chu Xiu still felt a little uncomfortable. He was more sensitive about things like birthday banquets. Generally speaking, as long as he participated in a birthday banquet, it would not end well. He also wondered if he was suffering from the reverse fate of occasions like birthday banquets. However, this time Chu Xiu was really going to join forces with people from overseas. He was not going to look for trouble. Therefore, Chu Xiu asked the anemophilia, do you know what the fifth Lord Hua likes? What did the major forces of the breezy ocean give him during his birthday banquets? The anemophilia smiled bitterly and said, with the fifth Lord Hua's identity, what rare treasures can't he get? Moreover, the fifth Lord Hua does not devote himself to martial arts. He doesn't care about cultivation manuals and the like. So you've stumped me on this. Then how do you give him birthday gifts? Do you just give them randomly? The anemophilia shrugged and said helplessly, just give them whatever you want. Of course, we have to choose the precious ones. In fact, the martial arts forces of the breezy ocean also had some complaints about the fifth Lord Hua holding birthday banquets frequently. Although the fifth Lord Hua said that his birthday banquets were just for everyone to have fun together. Even if he did not give gifts, who would dare to refuse? But since the old man said so, who would dare to not give gifts? Moreover, they could not give gifts lightly. If others give expensive gifts, you can give something light, but it also depends on the strength of your sect. Even if a small island owner just gave a calligraphy painting, the fifth Lord Hua would not be picky. But if you, a big island owner, also gave a calligraphy painting, then the fifth Lord Hua would not be happy even if he did not say it. Then you would be out of luck. Everyone is competing with each other to give gifts, and none of the forces dare to hide their gifts. The expenses are not ordinary. Chu Xiu said with a faint smile. Aren't you afraid that something will go wrong by slandering the fifth Lord Hua here? The anemophilia chuckled and said, the fifth Lord Hua will not care about an ant-like person like me. Moreover, these things are being discussed in the entire breezy ocean, so there is no way we can control them all. But if the 2 of you want to attend the fifth Lord Hua's birthday banquets, you'd better think of a way to get an invitation. Chu Xiu asked doubtfully, can't anyone attend the birthday banquets? Anyone can attend the birthday banquets, but do the 2 of you know how many forces there are in the entire breezy ocean, and how many lone cultivators there are? On the day of the birthday banquets, the entire Supreme Island will be packed. Most people can only have a banquet outside, and they are not qualified to enter the inner house at all. Only those who have less than 1,000 invitations are qualified to enter the inner house and see the fifth Lord Hua. Chu Xiu knocked on the table and asked, then how can I get an invitation? the anemophilia said. There is nothing I can do about that. The invitations are sent to the leaders of the various forces, and no one will sell them. However, one invitation can bring 3 people. Some loose cultivators are alone, so they will help their juniors, or directly sell their spots. You can all give it a try. Recently, a great-grandson of the 5th Lord Hua has been giving out invitations on the Haotian Island. You can try your luck there, and see if you can get one. Of course, it will be very difficult. The invitations are limited, and even if that person is the great-grandson of the 5th Lord Hua, he won't dare to do anything. Chu Xiu nodded and left with Yi Buoxuan. As long as he had some clues, it would be easy to get an invitation. Chu Xiu first went to the place where the great-grandson of the 5th Lord Hua was with Yi Buoxuan. The Haotian Island was jointly managed by various forces, and the Supreme Island naturally had a part in it. At the moment, in a house, a young man in a brocade robe was holding a pen and paper, and he was giving out invitations one by one. To be more precise, it was the people who were invited to the birthday party who went up to him to confirm their identities, and then went to him to get the invitations. In the past, it was usually the host's family who came to deliver the invitations, but the great-grandson of the 5th Lord Hua was too lazy to go from house to house, so he stayed on the Haotian Island and called everyone over to get the invitations himself. When someone came, he would cross off the name on the list. It was easy and effortless. But even so, he still reprimanded impatiently, "Hurry up. What are you waiting for? I'm waiting here to give you invitations on such a hot day, and you're still dilly-dallying? Even the old turtle in the sea is faster than you." Hearing that, the faces of the sect leaders and island masters darkened, but they didn't act up. After all, the person was the great-grandson of the 5th Lord Hua, and he was even a direct descendant. It was said that the 5th Lord Hua doted on him, so they couldn't afford to offend him. But seeing this scene, Chu Xiu shook his head. Some powerful island masters were definitely personally sent invitations by the Supreme Island's higher-ups, but the strength of the people present wasn't weak either. At least among those who came to get the invitations, there were many real pellet state, and the weakest was at the unity of man and nature state. But the great-grandson of the 5th Lord Hua was only at the physical invulnerability state. Although with Chu Xiu's current realm, a real pellet state could be easily killed with a slap. But in the eyes of most martial artists, the Grandmaster of the real pellet state was already an unattainable existence. In the Central Plains warriors, they could establish their own sects, and in the overseas land, they could also dominate an island. But now they were humiliated by this young man. This was simply ruining the Supreme Island's reputation. Chapter 1006. Yi Buoxuan also saw the behavior of the 5th Lord Hua's great-grandson. He shook his head and said, "The 5th Lord Hua's vision is amazing, but it's a pity that none of his descendants live up to expectations. They are all mediocre, and it's not uncommon for them to have a bad reputation like this. But he still has 5 adopted sons, which is enough to protect the entire Supreme Island." Seeing the appearance of Hua Xingzuan's great-grandson, Chu Xiu was even more curious about the 5th Lord Hua. The other party's vision is simply amazing. He has 5 adopted sons in a row, and each of them is outstanding. But his method of educating his descendants is a bit too mediocre. Looking at his behavior, he is even inferior to those of the 9 great families in the Central Plains. At this moment, there was a sudden quarrel outside, and there was even a faint sound of exploding aura. Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan went out to take a look. It turned out to be 2 real pellet state martial artists fighting fiercely on the street. A group of people around were watching as if they were used to this kind of situation. It should be said that this kind of situation was very common on Haotian Island. This was not the territory of one family, and any disputes could be resolved directly on the island. Of course, both sides had to control the strength of their attacks. Otherwise, if they hurt the innocent, someone would intervene. The 2 real pellet state martial artists who were fighting were one old and one young. The young man looked like he was in his early 30s, and his actual age should be less than 50 years old. His talent was very good. However, he had obviously just stepped into the real pellet state not long ago, and he was inferior to the old man opposite him. He was already at a disadvantage. The young martial artist said hatefully, Lin Sungyip. In the past, you were chased by your enemies like a stray dog. It was my father who saved you and let you join the Long Gorge Island. Now that my father is dead, you can't wait to take my Long Gorge Island. Do you have any shame? You're simply unscrupulous. Lin Sungyip sneered. Xiaoziki, don't talk like you are so wronged. After so many years, who is the reason why the Long Gorge Island can grow to such a scale? It's me. You, Mr. Xiao, used the forces I fought for and the resources and elixirs I earned to cultivate behind closed doors. Without me, can you have the strength you have now? Your father saved my life. When he was alive, I regarded him as my master. But now that he is gone, what right do you have to be the island master? The enmity between these two people was very simple. Chu Xiu had already figured it out long ago. It was nothing more than their own families infighting. This Lin Zongye plotted to seize the foundation left behind by Xiaoziki's father. He believed that his contribution was greater than Xiaoziki's, and that the position of island master should belong to him. On the other hand, Ziki thought that he was a traitor to Xiao was a traitor to. Actually, both of them were not wrong. Every man for himself, and heaven and earth would destroy him. Who was right and who was wrong when it came to conflicts of interest? Lin Sungyip said coldly, hand over the invitation. You don't have to go to the fifth Lord Hua's birthday banquet anymore. I'll do it for you. Only the leaders of the major forces were qualified to go to the Supreme Island to celebrate Hua Xingzuan's birthday banquet. This person used to be Xiaoziki's father. Now it was naturally him. Hence, the invitation was given to him. It must be said that Hua Xingzuan's prestige in the breezy ocean had reached a certain level. Even attending his birthday banquet had become a symbol of status. However, Chu Xiu's heart skipped a beat. An invitation? Xiaoziki said coldly, dream on. Moreover, the Xiao family's name is written on the invitation. Even if you have the invitation, you won't be able to go to the Supreme Island. A strange smile appeared on Lin Zongye's face. Is that so? But it's very common for the ruler of an island to change. I believe the Hua family will understand. Am I right, young Master Hua? The young master of the Hua family, who had been handing out the invitations in the courtyard, was now standing at the side watching the commotion. Hearing this, he only said lazily, Old Lin, don't forget to bring me 72 clear dust pearls when you come to the island. If you bring something, I will recognize the invitation. If you don't, even if you bring 100 invitations, it will be useless. When everyone heard this, they immediately knew what was going on. Lin Sungyip was really well prepared. He had already hooked up with the young master of the Hua family. Although the name of the invitation was wrong, which was against the rules, the disciples of the Supreme Island might not take it seriously since the young master Hua had spoken. At this moment, Xiaoziki's heart was filled with despair. Lin Sungyip had already planned everything. Was the foundation that his father left behind going to be lost just like that? But suddenly, a voice was heard. If I help you get rid of this old man, how about you bring the two of us when you go to the Supreme Island? Everyone immediately looked at Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan when they heard the voice. Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan naturally wouldn't flaunt their true fire spirit refinement state aura when they went to the island. Instead, they concealed their aura. However, people like Xiaoziki and Lin Sungyip could tell that Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan weren't simple at all, because even they couldn't see through them. Therefore, Xiaoziki didn't even consider the background of Chu Xiu and the others. He immediately said, If the two of you can help me, I'll give you anything you want. His family's business was about to be taken away. As long as the other party didn't want his life, he was willing to give them anything they wanted. Lin Sungyip squinted his eyes and said, People of the Central Plains, this is an overseas dispute. It's best that you don't interfere. The clothes that Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan were wearing were very different from those of the overseas martialists. Coupled with their accents, it was easy to tell that they were from the Central Plains. Lin Sungyip's tone was filled with fear and threat. However, his heart skipped a beat when he saw the look in Chu Xiu's eyes. This was because Chu Xiu's eyes looked as if he was looking at a dead man. Before Lin Sungyip could speak, Chu Xiu had already used his palm as a blade and slashed out gently. A wisp of black fire condensed in Chu Xiu's blade. It seemed very weak and tiny, and it didn't even emit any energy fluctuations. However, at this moment, the terrifying instinct of being in a life-and-death situation made Lin Sungyip erupt with all his strength. He even burned his essence and blood to resist the weak black fire. However, this was still in vain. That black flame easily burned through his protective Zhenqi and touched his body. In an instant, his entire body was burned into a pile of ashes, leaving no bones behind. Everyone present suddenly fell into silence. They couldn't believe that a martial arts grandmaster of the real pellet state died so easily in the hands of the opponent. Everyone present couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. Even Yi Buoxuan was the same. He was an old man in the demonic path. He had dealt with both Ming Mo and Yin Mo. Most of the people in the demonic path were paranoid and crazy. No matter what they did, it wasn't too much. Therefore, when Yi Buoxuan first met Chu Xiu, he actually didn't feel that Chu Xiu was a demonic cultivator. Because although Chu Xiu was ruthless, his opponents were all his enemies. Moreover, Chu Xiu didn't have any strange dark hobbies like other demonic cultivators, nor did he rape, pillage, or kill his enemies. But now Yi Buoxuan understood that in the entire demonic path, perhaps he, Chu Xiu, was the person with the deepest demonic nature. Originally, this matter had nothing to do with him. However, because of the invitation, he had jumped out to kill someone. From this, it could be seen what exactly human life represented in Chu Xiu's heart. Perhaps, to him, human life was just a tool, a stepping stone. That was the most terrifying thing, because you didn't know when you would have a conflict of interest with Chu Xiu one day. At that time he wouldn't kill you so easily. At this time in the silence, a discordant voice suddenly sounded. Hey, you killed old Lin. What about the Mingchen bead he promised to give me? Are you going to compensate me? The young master of the Hua family spoke first, and there was even extreme dissatisfaction in his tone. The others might be shocked by Chu Xiu's strength, but he wasn't. Since he was young, he had been surrounded by too many strong cultivators. The foster sons of his ancestors were not easy to deal with. Hearing this voice, Chu Xiu frowned. When he looked over, his eyes seemed to be nurturing a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. It was extremely terrifying. The young master of the Hua family was shocked, and he didn't dare to say another word. But at this time, an old man with the strength of true fire spirit refinement realm walked over from afar. The others all respectfully called him Yui Feng. This was one of the current managers of Haotian Island. He was a lone cultivator, but his seniority in terms of seniority was very high. Feng didn't say anything. He only released his own aura and said calmly, when the strong cultivators of the Central Plains come to our East Sea, the people of the East Sea are warm and hospitable, and we will definitely treat them well. However, if they kill people as soon as they come, we don't dare to treat them well even if we want to. As he said that, Feng's body released a powerful pressure that attacked Chu Xiu. However, a powerful pressure that was 10 times or even 100 times stronger than the previous one descended, causing Feng's eyes to bulge. In less than 3 breaths' time, he couldn't bear the pressure anymore. He shook his head and said, "There are talented people in every generation. I'm old." After saying that, Feng actually turned around and left. Before he left, he said calmly, "There aren't many rules on Haotian Island. When it comes to personal grievances, death is death. However, don't think that anyone can act recklessly on Haotian Island. The East Sea isn't a place where anyone can act recklessly." Chu Xiu was famous among the Central Plains warriors. However, in the East Sea, or rather, in the eyes of a semi-retired martial artist like Feng, he didn't have much of an impression. However, regardless of whether it was the Central Plains or overseas, strength was the best proof of everything. Just that aura alone was enough to make him feel that even if he had been at his peak when he was young, he probably wouldn't have been able to withstand 3 moves from this person before him. Chapter 1007. Strength was the most useful passport, no matter where one was. The Haotian Island was loosely managed. The rules might be useful to others, but to people like Chu Xiu, they were basically useless. Thus, Elder Feng only left a few pleasantries before disappearing. Even the young master of the Hua family dejectedly returned to continue sending out invitations. He no longer felt the heartache over the clear dust pearl that he had yet to obtain. Xiao Ziki came over and cupped his hands in gratitude. Thank you, Senior, for helping me get rid of this traitor. I am very grateful. Chu Xiu waved his hand casually and said, You don't have to be so polite. It's just a deal. Don't forget what you promised me. Xiao Ziki nodded and said, Don't worry, I will take the two of you to the fifth Lord Hua's birthday celebration in a few days. In fact, Xiao Ziki was also very puzzled. He could see that the two of them were experts in the true fire spirit refining realm. There were only a few experts at this level in the overseas region. Why would such people come to the fifth Lord Hua's birthday celebration? Could it be that the fifth Lord Hua's reputation was so great that it could affect the experts in the Central Plains? Although Xiao Ziki was puzzled, he did not ask much. He just invited Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan to wait at his residence. At this time, Yi Buoxuan suddenly asked Chu Xiu through voice transmission, Official Chu, I don't think there's anything special about this Xiao Ziki. Why did you choose to help him instead of Lin Sungyip? Is it because you hate traitors, Official Chu? Yi Buoxuan could see that Chu Xiu had killed someone casually because of the invitation. Therefore, it didn't matter who he killed just now. If he helped Lin Sungyip kill Xiao Ziki, he would still get the invitation. Chu Xiu shook his head gently and said, I don't hate traitors. In fact, many people in the Jianghu say that I, Chu Xiu, am a traitor. It's not the first time I've betrayed my master. Although I don't hate traitors, I don't want to cooperate with idiots. Lin Sungyip was too useless. He thought himself clever and was greedy. According to him, he had been in charge of all the affairs of the Long Gorge Island for so many years, while Xiao Ziki only focused on cultivation. Therefore, even if he was not the island lord, his prestige must be higher than Xiao Ziki's. This matter could have been carried out step by step. He could have secretly schemed to make the entire Long Gorge Island fall out with Xiao Ziki and ruin his reputation. Then he would be forced to become the island lord. But in the end, Lin Sungyip insisted on taking it by force. Obviously, he was a greedy and stupid guy. All humans are greedy. I can cooperate with greedy people, and I can tolerate greed, but I can't tolerate a greedy idiot. Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Yi Buoxuan broke out in a cold sweat. Lin Sungyip was lucky to have met Xiao Ziki, a guy who only had strength, but had no experience in scheming. If he had met Chu Xiu, he would have been cheated until not even his bones were left. Of course, not even his bones were left now. At this moment, a voice suddenly rang out. I didn't expect to meet the famous official Chu in the East Sea, as well as sect leader Yi Buoxuan of the Sixth Demon Sect. What an honor! Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan both looked back in surprise. They didn't expect someone to recognize them in a place like this. The speaker was a middle-aged man in purple with an extraordinary aura. This middle-aged man also had the strength of the true fire spirit refinement realm. His aura was condensed and abnormally dense. Seeing Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan, he greeted them with cupped hands. Every move he made was filled with a sense of grandeur. Before Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan could ask, the man took the initiative and said, I am Pak Donglai. I run some small businesses in the East Sea. It's normal that you haven't heard of me. Yi Buoxuan smiled and said, Tian Yishui Hall Pavilion Master. Purple Air from the East Pak Donglai is famous. Who doesn't know of him? Moreover, if Tian Yishui Hall is only a small business, then all the shops in the East Sea can only be described as street stalls. As Yi Buoxuan said this, he secretly introduced Pak Donglai to Chu Xiu. This person was born in the wilderness. In his early years, he brought a few small boats to the Windbreaker Sea in search of treasures and opportunities. After he accumulated some savings, he built Tian Yishui Hall on various islands in the East Sea. He sold all kinds of rare treasures, weapons, elixirs, cultivation methods, ancient books, and so on. At the same time, he also bought some resources from rogue cultivators. Because Pak Donglai's Tian Yishui Hall was fair and honest, even when he bought some items from rogue cultivators, he would try his best to give a higher price. Therefore, in the East Sea, Pak Donglai had a good reputation. Moreover, he was a righteous person. If anyone encountered difficulties and asked for help from Tian Yishui Hall, as long as it was not too excessive, the Tian Yishui Hall on each island would help as much as possible. Although there were some people who took advantage of him, most people were grateful to him. In short, This person was also a big shot in the East Sea. Pak Donglai asked. Both of you are big shots in the Central Plains warriors. May I know why you have come to the East Sea this time? Chu Xiu smiled and said, I have long heard of the name of the fifth Lord Hua of the East Sea Supreme Island. This time, we have come to congratulate the fifth Lord Hua on his birthday. Pak Donglai only smiled and said, That's great. I will also attend the fifth Lord Hua's birthday. We will see you then. If the two of you don't mind, after the fifth Lord Hua's birthday, you can also come to my Tainishui Hall as a guest. After exchanging some pleasantries, Pak Donglai turned and left. After Pak Donglai left, Ibuoshuan asked, Official Chu, what do you think of this person? Chu Xiu said calmly, He seems to be generous and forthright, but in fact he is very thoughtful and knows his limits. They were both experienced and astute people. Pak Donglai might be able to deceive others, but he could not deceive Chu Xiu. Since the other party knew them, he should have noticed Chu Xiu when Chu Xiu stood out to kill people. In the end, he only came out after Chu Xiu killed the people and Feng was scared away. He pretended to be surprised and did not want to get involved in trouble. Moreover, Chu Xiu said that he had only come to celebrate the fifth Lord Hua's birthday. Even an idiot would not believe him. If Pak Donglai was really generous and forthright, he would definitely flick his sleeves and leave on the spot. However, he seemed to really believe it and did not even say a word of doubt. Moreover, he could also guess that Chu Xiu was wary of him. Therefore, after exchanging a few pleasantries, he turned around and left. He did not continue to be entangled here. That was why Chu Xiu said that he knew his limits. Ibuoshuan said with a smile, Pak Donglai has a good reputation in this area of the Breeze Sea. I don't think many people will believe what you said about him. Chu Xiu said expressionlessly, Those who really believe in it are either those inexperienced youths, or they're really stupid. Pak Donglai has such strength now and his Tainishui Hall has such influence now. If this person is not scheming enough, I'm afraid he would have been tricked to death long ago. Although that was what he said, Chu Xiu did not care about Pak Donglai. He did not have any enmity towards Chu Xiu and Ibuoshuan. He was just curious and testing them out. He wanted to make friends with them. The two of them were big shots among the Central Plains warriors. In particular, Chu Xiu had suddenly come to the East Sea. As long as someone recognized them, it would definitely arouse suspicion. Therefore, it was not strange for Pak Donglai to test them out. Moreover, for people like Pak Donglai, networking and other things had almost become a habit. When he met Chu Xiu and Ibuoshuan, two experts who did not have a direct conflict of interest with him, he subconsciously wanted to get to know them. Even if he could not help him, it was still good to have such connections. The two of them followed Xiao Ziki to his residence on Haotian Island. A few days later, when the birthday of the fifth Lord Hua began, they were ready to leave. During this period of time, Xiao Ziki had indeed suspected that Chu Xiu and Ibuoshuan insisted on attending the birthday of the fifth Lord Hua. He wondered if they had ulterior motives, and whether they would implicate him. However, Xiao Ziki dared not ask or say these things. If it were not for Chu Xiu, his foundation would have been occupied by Lin Sungyip. Of course, the most important thing was that based on how easily Chu Xiu killed Lin Sungyip, as if he was crushing an ant, Xiao Ziki had no doubt that he would end up the same if he did anything. Before Xiao Ziki reached the real pellet state, his father told him that as long as he broke through to the real pellet state, he could become the overlord of an island. Now that he had reached the real pellet state, he found that in the face of a powerhouse like Chu Xiu, the real pellet state was just a slightly stronger ant. This truth even made Xiao Ziki lose his mind for a while. The big ship was approaching the Supreme Island, and there were many ships heading towards the Supreme Island. They were obviously preparing to celebrate the birthday of the fifth Lord Hua. After going ashore, Chu Xiu also sized up the Supreme Island. The Supreme Island wasn't too big, but the scenery was beautiful, and the chi of heaven and earth was extremely abundant. It could be said to be a treasure land. The buildings on the island were extremely luxurious. In Chu Xiu's opinion, they were even more luxurious than the northern Yan. The building in the center of the island was no longer a house, but a small palace. With Xiao Ziki carrying the invitation, it was easy to enter the palace. However, at this time, Chu Xiao and the others didn't notice that there were several pairs of eyes watching them from the other side of the palace. The young master of the Hua family that Chu Xiao had met before was standing there. There were two other people standing beside him. One of them was dressed in battle armor and had a ferocious and fierce appearance. He gave off an intimidating feeling without being angry. There was another person who was even stranger. He was actually sitting cross-legged in the air, completely supported by his stellar energy. However, upon closer inspection, one would discover that he was not maintaining such a strange posture. Instead, it was because he did not have legs. Chapter 1008. The people who were secretly observing Chu Xiao and the others were none other than Hua Xingzuan's second foster son, Bailey Pobing, the owner of Divine Weapon Island, and his fourth foster son, Naylan Hai. Bailey Pobing grabbed the Hua family's young master and brought him in front of him. He asked loudly, "Kid, you're saying that these two fellows deliberately killed people in order to attend foster father's birthday celebration? That's how they obtained the invitation?" Young Master Hua nodded and said, "That's right, it's the two of them. They seem to be some big shots of the Central Plains warriors." Bailey Pobing turned his gaze to Naylan Hai and asked, "The fourth prince, you usually like to study these messy news. You should know the Central Plains warriors the best. What's the background of these two fellas? Foster father's birthday is such a joyous occasion. We can't let them disturb it." Naylan Hai's appearance was that of a young man with a pale face. His hair was disheveled, but the gloominess in his eyes did not dissipate no matter what. The fifth Lord Hua's foster sons were all dragons and phoenixes among men. Naylan Hai used to be one, but now he was a crippled dragon and phoenixes among men. Kong Dongming's strength was almost invincible among those below the heaven and earth mysterious realm. He was so powerful that it made people feel hopeless. Even if the fifth Lord Hua's foster sons attacked him together, they might not be able to defeat him. Moreover, the fifth Lord Hua's foster sons each had their own thoughts. They were all the fifth Lord Hua's foster sons, but they were not brothers. For example, Zhao Yuanfeng knew that Kong Dongming had injured him, but he still dared to use Kong Dongming as his follower. Among the fifth Lord Hua's foster sons, he was only close to Bailey Pobing. The young Master Hua glanced at Naylan Hai cautiously. Of course, the fifth Lord Hua's foster sons were all people he could not afford to offend. The fifth Lord Hua treated them better than his own sons. However, young Master Hua was not afraid of the ferocious Bailey Pobing. Instead, he was afraid of the taciturn Naylan Hai. Hearing this, Naylan Hai said indifferently, "Strictly speaking, the one in the black robe and mask is not a martial artist from the Central Plains. He is the leader of the sixth demon sect in the South China Sea, Yibuxuan. As for that young man, if I'm not mistaken, he should be the strongest person in the Yinma clan on the surface. He is also its leader, the leader of the subduing martial hall, Chu Xiao. He is definitely a big shot in the Central Plains warriors. He is in charge of the Yinma clan, and all the forces in the northern Yan martial world regard him as the supreme leader. Although he is not the leader of the Guanzhong torture room in name, he is his puppet. One of the four spirits, the former leader of the Blue Dragon Society, Butian-nan, was killed. In the end, the Blue Dragon Society did not avenge him. Instead, it was controlled by the murderer. The information that Naylan Hai said was not new to the Central Plains warriors. Almost everyone knew about it. However, it was not easy to have such detailed information about Chu Xiao in the overseas area. Bailey Pobing was speechless. He said, "This guy has such a powerful background. The Yinma clan is not worried at all. How could they hand over such a big foundation to such a young man?" Naylan Hai squinted his eyes and said, "In the Jianghu, apart from distinguishing one's seniority, is there any other meaning to age? As long as one is powerful enough, what foundation can't he get? The fourth prince, I think this guy is up to no good when he comes to celebrate his godfather's birthday. He is a big shot of the devil path in the Central Plains. What is he doing in the East Sea? Anyway, none of the warriors in the Central Plains are good people. How about this? Before the birthday celebration starts, I will find a reason to kick him out." In the past, before Bailey Pobing became the fifth Lord Hua's adopted son, he had gone to the Central Plains to make a living. No one knew what happened at that time. However, it was said that Bailey Pobbing suffered a great loss. Therefore, as long as he met warriors from the Central Plains, even if they did not provoke him, they would be easily beaten up by him. Nalanhai glanced at him and said, "This is my godfather's birthday celebration. He hasn't done anything yet. What are you so anxious about? If you act rashly, the one who will be kicked out might not be Chu Xiu, but you. Keep an eye on him and observe the situation. Remember, this is the outer endless sea, the supreme island. This is our territory, not Chu Xiu's." Although that was what Nalanhai said, he still had doubts in his heart. He remembered that Eastern Qi had already started to attack the Northern Yan. This Chu Xiu had close relations with the Northern Yan royalty. Even the Northern Yan royalty was helped onto the throne by him. Did he come to the East Sea have something to do with this? At that moment, Chu Xiu had already followed Xiao Ziki into the hall. It was an extraordinarily gorgeous hall, with tables and seats placed around it. However, Xiao Ziki was in a dilemma. There were only a limited number of true fire spirit refinement state experts in the breezy sea. Therefore, there were also a limited number of seats at the front that were specially prepared for true fire spirit refinement state experts. With Xiao Ziki's strength and influence, he could only sit in the middle. However, Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan were genuine true fire spirit refinement state experts. Did they have to sit with him? Fortunately, this time, Chu Xiu was here to find someone to work with, and not to look for trouble. Therefore, he did not argue over a seat. He simply said, "Sit down." About an hour later, the hall was filled with people. There were 5 seats at the front, but only 3 people were seated. Those 5 seats were naturally reserved for Hua Xingzuan's 5 adopted sons. Even his own sons did not have this kind of treatment. The first seat was already empty. It was reserved for his eldest son, Qiu Tianya. Although Qiu Tianya had been missing for 50 years, he still had a seat at Hua Xingzuan's birthday celebration. The second seat was the island master of Divine Weapon Island, Bailey Pobbing. For some reason, Chu Xiu always felt that Bailey Pobbing was looking at him. The third seat was the master of the Blue Dragon Fleet, Fu Longxiao. This person wore a brocade robe with dragon patterns, and had an imposing appearance. He was also the strongest among the 3. The fourth seat was Nalanhai. However, he always had a kind of unapproachable aura, which made people fear him. The fifth seat was also empty now. This seat was naturally reserved for Zhao Yuanfeng. At this moment, a loud voice came from outside. "The 5th Lord is here." As the voice came, an old man with white hair and beard, dressed in luxurious clothes, walked into the hall surrounded by a group of children and grandchildren. Hearing this voice, everyone present turned their eyes to the 5th Lord Hua. Even Chu Xiu's eyes were attracted. He was really curious about who this 5th Lord Hua was. His eyesight could actually reach such a level. However, at first glance, Chu Xiu was a little disappointed. Ordinary to ordinary. For most martial artists, not to mention the true fire spirit refinement state, even the real pellet state was something that could only be encountered by chance. However, in the eyes of people at Chu Xiu's level, there were also differences in the true fire spirit refinement state. The Sun family's ancestor and the Lu family's ancestor, who died in his hands before, belonged to the mediocre type. Not long ago in the Guanzhong torture room, Meiko Mori, Nangong Weiyu, and Helian Changfeng were all defeated by him, but it was not because he was too weak but because Chu Xiu was too strong. Individually, the 3 of them were not easy to deal with. On Hua Xingzuan, Chu Xiu did not see too many anomalies. On the contrary, in his opinion, this Hua Xingzuan was even a little weak. There was not much evil aura on his body, which proved that he had not fought with others for a long time. Even when his combat power was at its peak, he rarely fought with others, so his combat power should not be high. Moreover, Hua Xingzuan's body exuded an extremely strong aura. It was so strong that it was a little abnormal. This proved that he often used various elixirs and natural treasures as tonics, and the tonics were a little too much, even to the point that it was emitted through his aura. Also, the aura around his body was different from the ordinary true fire spirit refinement state martial artists. True fire spirit refinement state used the power of the spirit to trigger the power of heaven and earth. Every move was in line with the power of heaven and earth. This was a subconscious move. For example, if it was raining now, the existence of true fire spirit refinement state like Chu Xiu, even if he didn't use true qi to block the raindrops would involuntarily deviate and avoid them. However, the aura around He Xingzuan's body was very chaotic, as if he couldn't control this power at all. Could it be that even the power of the true fire spirit refinement realm was obtained from an external object? But what external objects could allow someone to step into true fire spirit refinement state? While Chu Xiu was thinking, He Xingzuan had already walked to the main seat and sat down. He cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Time passes really quickly. I didn't expect that in the blink of an eye, I would already be 380 years old. This birthday, every time we celebrate it, we get older. In a few more years, perhaps everyone will have to attend Ai's funeral." Someone immediately said, "What are you talking about, Fifth Lord? The Eastern Sea is fortunate to have the protection of the Fifth Lord. The Fifth Lord will definitely live on for tens of thousands of years." That's right. All these years, the Fifth Lord has blessed the Eastern Sea. How could the heavens let the Fifth Lord leave just like that? The Fifth Lord will definitely have a long life of good fortune. A series of flattering words came from the audience. They sounded very mushy, but everyone knew that the Fifth Lord would actually love to hear such words. When people get old, they all fear death, and He Xingzuan was even more so. Although he kept saying that he didn't have long to live, if someone said those unlucky words in front of him, he would be very unhappy. Waving his hand, He Xingzuan said with a smile, all right, I have already been blessed by the heavens for being able to live until now. If I continue living, I will really become an old man. Originally, I didn't plan to celebrate this birthday, and plan to celebrate it when I'm 388 years old. However, I'm afraid that I won't be able to see all of you after another 8 years. Therefore, I brought it forward a little so that I can have some fun with all of you. At this time, the third son of He Xingzuan, Fu Longxiao, was the first to step forward. He bowed and said, "Don't worry, foster father. After 8 years, I will definitely hold an even bigger birthday banquet for you, and invite some of the powerful experts in the windbreaking sea. This time, I went to the windbreaking sea and brought back a sea bodhi. The fruit it bore was actually a longevity peach. Clearly, the heavens are preparing a congratulatory gift for you, foster father." With that, Fu Longxiao waved his hand and ordered someone to bring the congratulatory gift. However, at this moment, Chu Xiu clearly noticed that Bailey Pobbing and Naylan Hai's expressions had turned gloomy. Chapter 1009. From Zhao Yuanfeng's incident, Chu Xiu could tell that the relationship between He Xingzuan's foster sons was not harmonious. Now it was even more obvious. According to the ranking, Qiu Tinya had disappeared, so Bailey Pobbing was the leader. Therefore, if he wanted to speak and present a congratulatory gift, he should have been the first to speak. But now, Fu Longxiao had taken the lead. Moreover, Fu Longxiao was very good at business. His Blue Dragon fleet traveled between the Windbreaker Sea and the Breezy Sea, bringing in a huge amount of resource trading revenue every time. Although Bailey Pobbing was also the master of an island, he was just a boorish fellow. Before Kong Dongming crippled his legs, Naylan Hai had some tricks up his sleeves. Unfortunately, after his legs were crippled, he was unable to recover. He lived in seclusion on a nameless island with only a few servants serving him. He could not be said to have any influence. Therefore, among He Xingzuan's foster sons, Fu Longxiao was the strongest. After Fu Longxiao, Bailey Pobbing and Naylan Hai presented their gifts. However, compared to Fu Longxiao's sea bodhi, their gifts were much shabbier. Bailey Pobbing presented a godly weapon. Seeing this, Chu Xiu shook his head slightly. After being someone else's foster son for so many years, how could he not see what level He Xingzuan was? Even if you gave him listen to spring rain, He Xingzuan probably wouldn't take a liking to it. It was useless. As for Naylan Hai, what he presented was even shabbier. It turned out to be a calligraphy and painting he wrote. However, the calligraphy and painting were full of sword chi. It was obvious that Naylan Hai had put a lot of thought into it. It could even be said that a real pellet state martial artist could use this calligraphy and painting as a martial arts secret manual. However, It was still useless for Hua Xingzuan. So for these two people, Hua Xingzuan just smiled gently. He was not as happy as when he received Fu Longxiao's birthday gift. After the three presented their gifts, the rest handed the gifts to the Hua family servants in order, and then the other party read out the names. In fact, the gifts given by the servants were very ordinary. Basically, there was nothing too outrageous. As long as it was not too bad, it was fine. Hua Xingzuan held a birthday celebration every few years. Who would have the financial resources to prepare so many heavenly materials and earthly treasures every time? When it was Chu Xiu's turn, the servant of the Hua family looked at what Chu Xiu handed to him, and he was slightly taken aback. It turned out to be something like a blueprint, but after seeing the explanation on it, he was so shocked that he almost shouted out. He calmed his emotions and shouted, "Long Gorge Island's Xiao Ziki presents a relic weapon blueprint." Because Chu Xiu came with Xiao Ziki's invitation, the servant of the Hua family didn't know Chu Xiu, so the name he read was also Xiao Ziki's. But when they heard this, the people present suddenly exploded. Relic weapon blueprint? This Xiao Ziki isn't good enough? How could he take out such a thing as a birthday gift? Whether it was in the Central Plains or overseas, relic weapon blueprints were extremely precious. It could even be said that relic weapon blueprints were more expensive than relic weapons. The reason was very simple. It was because relic weapons could not be replicated. 99% of weapon refinement grandmasters could forge a relic weapon. But if you asked them to forge an identical relic weapon, it could be said to be extremely difficult. It could even be said to be basically impossible. Part of the reason for forging a relic weapon was the materials. Weapon refinement grandmaster's level was another, and luck was another. Therefore, relic weapons could not be mass-produced because luck was something that no one could predict. But now what Chu Xiu took out was the blueprint of the Heavenly War case. This thing was between a mechanism and a weapon. As long as there were enough materials and it was completely forged according to the blueprint, it would definitely be a relic weapon, the kind that could be completely replicated. This kind of thing was much more precious. In fact, in history, there were only a few relic weapons like the Heavenly War case that could be replicated. They might not be the strongest relic weapon, but they were the most stable. Therefore, such a blueprint was even more precious than a relic weapon. Now that Chu Xiu no longer needed the Heavenly War case, there was no harm in taking it out as a congratulatory gift. Most importantly, if the Heavenly War case was used as an ordinary weapon, it would even be weaker than most relic weapons. Only with the Black Tortoise True technique, the Heavenly War case would be the real Heavenly War case. Of course, Chu Xiu would not hand over the Black Tortoise True technique so easily. At this moment, seeing that everyone's eyes were on Chu Xiu, Xiao Ziki hurriedly said, "Everyone, this congratulatory gift is not from me, but from official Chu." Everyone immediately turned their eyes to Chu Xiu. Only a few people present knew him, and most of them were still wondering who this person was. At this time, Pak Donglai, the pavilion leader of Tianyishui Hall whom Chu Xiu had met before, stood out and said, "This is Lord Chu Xiu of the Central Plains. In the Central Plains he is also a famous diabolism overlord, and even controls a country's Wulin." As he spoke, Pak Donglai briefly introduced the identity of Chu Xiu to everyone. Although it was a brief introduction, it still surprised everyone present. This person was really a big shot. The overseas region was much more realistic than the Central Plains, and there were not many differences between the Orthodox and the Devil. Therefore, they did not object to Chu Xiu's identity as a diabolism cultivator. In the Central Plains, the Orthodox and the Devil were divided into two. Chu Xiu controlled half of the diabolism, and he even controlled the Jianghu forces of a country. This was a rather shocking power. Bailey Pobbing and Naylan Hai, who were above, looked at each other, their eyes filled with doubt. What was Chu Xiu doing here? Why did he give such a precious birthday gift to foster father? They subconsciously turned their eyes to Hua Xingzuan, but they found that Hua Xingzuan was looking at Chu Xiu in a daze, as if he was looking at some rare treasure, and his eyes were even shining slightly. At this moment, Hua Xingzuan was indeed very excited. In his eyes, Chu Xiu was indeed a rare treasure, the kind that he had never seen or heard of before. as the most powerful person in the entire breezy ocean. It could even be said that Hua Xingzuan did not directly say that he was the master of the entire breezy ocean. The reason why he had such a status today was because of his 5 foster sons. Hua Xingzuan had never denied this. Therefore, many people suspected that he was proficient in the art of divination, that he was a great grandmaster, or that he had some kind of rare treasure on him. However, they had all guessed wrong. Hua Xingzuan did not know the art of divination. He did not even understand the cultivation of the martial way, let alone something as advanced as the art of divination. He did not have any rare treasure on him either. In fact, it should be said that his luck had never been very good. He had never even opened a secret box and found anything good. However, he was able to achieve what he had today by relying on an opportunity, an enormous opportunity. Hua Xingzuan was not originally a cultivator. He was only the son of a fisherman on a small island, and it was possible that he had nothing to do with the martial way in this life. However, when he was young, something had completely changed his fate. It was when Hua Xingzuan was in his teens. He was drying his fishing net on the shore, when a man in white robes, who looked like an immortal, came treading on the water. Under Hua Xingzuan's shocked gaze, the man asked him for directions. Hua Xingzuan had told him. The immortal had patted his head, thanked him and left. From then on, Hua Xingzuan felt that his body had become much lighter and stronger. He had even been valued by an island lord who had passed by and had been taken in as a follower. After he had started cultivating the martial way, he had discovered that his body had undergone some changes. As long as he concentrated on looking at a person, he would be able to see a ray of light from that person's body. Some were bright, some were dark. Later, as he had slowly explored, he had discovered that people who had a bright ray of light would definitely have extraordinary achievements in the future. They might even be able to soar into the sky one day. As for those who had a dim ray of light, they might be unlucky at any time, no matter how glorious they were. At that time, he had discovered that he could actually see a person's future luck. This kind of luck was very blurry, and he could only see it once. He was not sure if the person's luck would decrease after the person's luck increased. However, the more he saw, the more he could judge how far the person would go in the future based on the intensity of the ray of light. Therefore, Hua Xingzuan relied on his own opportunities to cling on to some people who seemed to be in dire straits now, but would have a rising destiny in the future. Hua Xingzuan would gain their trust, and when they rose, he would also follow them to the heavens. Therefore, even if Hua Xingzuan's martial arts talent was not the kind of amazing, he was still living a good life, and his path had been smooth sailing. What happened after that was much simpler. Hua Xingzuan met Qiu Tianya, who was still a teenager. The light on Qiu Tianya's body was so blinding that Hua Xingzuan's eyes hurt. Hence, Hua Xingzuan decisively took Qiu Tianya as his godson, and raised him for tens of years. Finally, Qiu Tianya reached the peak, and helped him build the foundation of the Supreme Island. Later on he met Bailey Pobing and the others, and he took them in as his foster sons before they were famous in Jianghu. Although the rays of light from them were much dimmer than Qiu Tianya's, they were already the brightest among all the people he had met. Relying on his ability to read people, Hua Xingzuan managed to get to where he was today. He had seen the rays of light from his own children, but they were all extremely dim. It was obvious that they were not important figures. Therefore, there were rumors in the outside world that he treated his adopted sons better than his own. This was indeed true, because he only had these few adopted sons to rely on. As for his descendants, even if they were his own, none of them lived up to his expectations. This was Hua Xingzuan's deepest secret. He did not even tell his wife and son about it. All this while, Hua Xingzuan had thought that he was a person favored by the heavens. When the immortal touched my head, I tied my hair and received eternal life. The person he met in the past must have been the legendary immortal. He had always been making use of the opportunities given by the immortal. Today he felt that his opportunity had arrived again. He also saw a strong ray of light from Chu Xiu, but it was different from Bailey Pobing and the others. It was also different from Qiu Tianya's. In the instant that he used his mind to look at Chu Xiu, he thought that he saw the sun. Chapter 10:10. At this moment, Chu Xiu did not know that He Xingzuan was thinking so much at this moment. He had presented such an expensive gift to attract the attention of others. And now he had achieved his goal. However, at this moment, Naylan Hai spoke in an ambiguous tone. Official Chu came all the way from Eastern Qi to my breezy sea. I'm afraid it's not as simple as celebrating foster father's birthday, right? Foster father has had so many birthday parties, but why haven't I seen official Chu come before? Upon hearing this, everyone present was stunned. Previously, they were shocked by Chu Xiu's identity and did not think of this point. The Central Plains and the overseas territories were mainly trade between them, and not to take root in the overseas territories. Who would be so bored to come and present gifts to He Xingzuan? Not to mention the Central Plains, even the Windbreak Sea, which was close to the Breezy Sea, had never been here before. Just now, Fu Longxiao said that he could invite the big shots and experts of the Windbreak Sea region to celebrate He Xingzuan's birthday. This was already a great honor for him. Chu Xiu waved his hand and said, "One doesn't visit without a cause. I'm here this time because I have something to discuss with the 5th Lord Hua. I'm sure everyone has heard about the dispute between the Central Plains warriors. Eastern Qi has started a war, and the Central Plains warriors are in a state of chaos. This time, I'm here to seek the cooperation of the Eastern Sea and attack Eastern Qi from behind. After staying on the island for so long, don't you want to try going ashore?" Everyone present had different expressions. No one expected Chu Xiu to have such a grand plan in his trip to the Eastern Sea. Most of the martial artists in the Eastern Sea knew about the news of Eastern Qi. The martial artists in the Eastern Sea could ignore the Central Plains warriors, but they couldn't ignore the trade that concerned them. The war that Eastern Qi had started this time involved too many people. Everywhere was under martial law, and even the trade to the Eastern Sea had been delayed. Some of the cultivation resources in the Central Plains had never been produced by the East Sea. They had to rely on trade between the two sides to obtain them. But now they were very scarce. In the past, Jiangshan Pavilion was in charge of this business. Now that Jiangshan Pavilion had gone to the Central Plains to establish a new country, the number of businessmen in Eastern Qi had decreased by a lot, which made them very anxious. However, at this moment, Naylan Hai said coldly, "Official Chu, please go back. The warriors of the Eastern Sea have always been used to freedom. We do not wish to get involved in the turmoil of the Central Plains warriors. Even if you personally come to ask for help, we will not agree." Chu Xiu waved his hand and said, "You're wrong. I'm not here to ask for help. As I said before, I'm here to ask for cooperation." Before Chu Xiu could say anything, Naylan Hai waved his hand and said, "We don't need cooperation either." A cold glint flashed in Chu Xiu's eyes. It had been a long time since anyone had dared to interrupt him. At this moment, He Xingzuan waved his hand and said, "The 4th prince, he's a guest from afar. Let him finish what he wants to say." When Naylan Hai heard that his godfather had already spoken, he didn't dare to say anything else. However, Naylan Hai was a little puzzled. Why was his godfather treating Chu Xiu so kindly? It had to be known that his godfather had always been hostile to the martial artists of the Central Plains. He Xingzuan was the overlord of the Cool Breeze Sea, the invisible ruler. What he was most worried about was that someone would shake his authority. Such people were most likely to appear in the Central Plains. After all, the distance between the two places was not far. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "5th Lord Hua, whether it's the Central Plains or overseas, we only seek one thing, benefits. With all due respect, although the overseas territories are not weak, they are definitely not strong either. Therefore, if the overseas territories dared to cause trouble in the Eastern Qi martial arts world, they would most likely suffer heavy casualties and be beaten back. They might even seal off trade. When that time comes, the overseas territories would be the ones to suffer. But now it's different. The Central Plains warriors are in chaos. This matter was instigated by Eastern Qi. Eastern Qi's defenses in the entire East Sea are now empty. If you take this opportunity to occupy a few counties, or even control the coast of Eastern Qi, it won't be difficult. Moreover, with the Northern Yan Imperial Court and all the forces of the Devil Path keeping them in check, I guarantee that Eastern Qi won't be able to find the strength to go back to support them in a short time. This matter is almost in the bag. Everyone attacking the outside is better than attacking the inside, right? Moreover, we won't be able to gain anything from the inside. When they heard Chu Xiu's words, most of the people present were tempted. It should be said that some forces near the coast had tried to step into the Central Plains warriors, but they had all met with tragic ends. This was not only because of the forces of the martial arts world in the Central Plains, but also because of the Eastern Qi Imperial Court's strict defense. After all, the overseas lands were all islands. They didn't have some resources, so they had to rely on the Central Plains to obtain them. As for the Central Plains, some of the special products of the overseas lands were dispensable. It was easy to find something to replace them. Therefore, the overseas land's desire for the Central Plains was extremely high. Of course, this matter still depended on the Fifth Lord Hua's opinion. A snake could not be without a head. If the overseas people charged forward like a mass of loose sand, even if Eastern Qi didn't have much power to defend the coast, they still wouldn't be able to break through. Only when the forces of the entire overseas lands were linked together could they break through the Eastern Qi's defense. And now, the person with the greatest power and prestige in the entire overseas lands was the Fifth Lord Hua. At this time, Naylan Hai snorted coldly and said, "Chu Xiu, your words are better than your singing. Do you really think no one knows about your situation in the Central Plains? The forces of the East Sea attacked the border of Eastern Qi's coast and put pressure on Eastern Qi, but in the end, you were the one who benefited. This is equivalent to us helping you share the burden, but you are here talking about cooperation. What a joke." Chu Xiu frowned. This Naylan Hai had always been against him. Previously, Chu Xiu thought that he had unintentionally offended him, but now it seemed that this person was purely dark and suspicious, and would subconsciously doubt everyone. Chu Xiu didn't find it strange that this kind of person had his legs chopped off by Kong Dongming. Chu Xiu had come into contact with Kong Dongming before. He was a person who had nothing but a sword. With Kong Dongming's character, he would never take the initiative to conflict with anyone. When Kong Dongming attacked Naylan Hai, it must be because this guy kept blocking Kong Dongming's way, which forced Kong Dongming to attack. Even now, Chu Xiu couldn't help but want to attack and cripple his two arms. Chu Xiu said lightly, "Island Master Naylan's words are wrong. I benefit, but don't tell me you don't benefit. When doing something, don't look at how much others benefit. No matter how much others benefit, it is still others. First, you have to look at whether you will suffer a loss or gain, isn't that right? If you attack Eastern Qi, I will be the only one who benefits, but you will be the one who loses. Then, I will be using you. But if we attack now, both of us will benefit. If this isn't cooperation, what is it?" Naylan Hai still wanted to say something, but Chu Xiu said indifferently, "May I ask, is the ruler of Supreme Island the Fifth Lord Hua or you, Naylan Hai? It seems that I gave this gift to the wrong person. It should be given to you, Island Master Naylan, and not to the Fifth Lord Hua." Naylan Hai's expression suddenly changed. He just realized that he had indeed overstepped his boundaries just now. The Fifth Lord Hua didn't say much. He was the only one talking. Even the disciples of the Hua family looked at him unkindly. "Chu Xiu, don't try to sow discord between my godfather and me." Chu Xiu spread out his hands and said, "The Fifth Lord Hua hasn't rejected it yet, and you're already rejecting it on his behalf. I'm not trying to sow discord. This is the truth." Just as Naylan Hai was about to say something, the Fifth Lord Hua waved his hand and said, "All right, the fourth prince, don't speak for now." Naylan Hai retreated to the side with a gloomy face. The Fifth Lord Hua looked at Chu Xiu with a kind gaze. "Does Chu really need the help of the East Sea?" Chu Xiu didn't hide anything. He said directly, "If we fight head-on, my side might not lose, but we will suffer great losses. If we join forces with the martial artists of the East Sea to attack Eastern Qi, Eastern Qi will definitely lose. Therefore, if I don't need the martial artists of the East Sea to make a move, I wouldn't have come here personally." The Fifth Lord Hua nodded and said, "All right, I agree to this matter." When he said this, not only were the others shocked, but even Chu Xiu was shocked. He didn't expect the Fifth Lord Hua to agree so quickly. However, at this time, the fifth Lord Hua suddenly said, "However, I have another request. As long as you can agree to it, Chu, I will immediately gather my men and attack Eastern Qi." What request? Chu Xiu wasn't surprised by the fifth Lord Hua's request. If the fifth Lord Hua had agreed so simply, Chu Xiu would have been surprised. The fifth Lord Hua looked at Chu Xiu, and there was an unconcealable look of surprise in his eyes. "Chu, you've come all the way from a humble background. You're definitely one of the most outstanding people in the world, and I am also very excited. In the entire overseas region, I can be considered to have some fame and influence, and I'm much older than you, Chu. Why don't we do this? Today, in front of everyone, I will accept you as my godson. From now on, we'll all be family, and there won't be any need to work together. When a family member is in trouble, how can I not help? Moreover, you don't have to worry about being bound to the East Sea after you become Ai's godson. Although Ai is old, I'm still very open-minded. If Qiu Tianyao wants to pursue the pinnacle of swordsmanship, I won't stop him. If Zhao Yuanfeng wants to go back to the Central Plains to build his country, I won't stop him either. After solving the problem of Eastern Qi, if Chu wants to go back to the Central Plains, I won't stop you either. What do you think, Chu?" The fifth Lord Hua still had a kind smile on his face, as if he was waiting for Chu Xiu to bow down to him. However, he didn't notice that the smile on Chu Xiu's face was gradually disappearing. Chapter 10-11. Everyone present really didn't expect the request of the fifth Lord Hua. They couldn't have guessed that the fifth Lord Hua was already so old. Yet he still wanted to accept a godson. Most importantly, this godson was different from his previous ones. Among the godson accepted by the fifth Lord Hua before, the strongest one at the beginning should be Fu Longshao. At that time, he was already a famous pirate who had reached the real pellet state. He accidentally plundered the ship of the Hua family, but he was valued by the fifth Lord Hua and accepted as a godson. There was also Zhao Yuanfeng. Although he was not the patriarch at that time, he was also at the real pellet state. But Chu Xiu was now a famous big shot in the underworld. It could be said that his status was not much worse than Hua Xingzuan's. Now that you accepted him as a godson, no matter how you looked at it, it felt like you were taking advantage of him. They didn't know what Hua Xingzuan saw. In the eyes of Hua Xingzuan, Chu Xiu's future achievements would be even higher than his current achievements. Accepting him as a godson, the benefits were simply immeasurable. However, Hua Xingzuan had neglected one point, and that was that people's thoughts were different at different stages of life. Now if he wanted to accept Fu Longshao, who was already the master of the Blue Dragon fleet, as a godson, Fu Longshao might not agree, let alone Chu Xiu. His own father was killed by Chu Xiu, not to mention that he had to acknowledge a godson now. So Chu Xiu stood up directly and said faintly, "It seems that the fifth Lord Hua still doesn't want to cooperate with me. Well, I will leave now." Hua Xingzuan frowned and said, "Chu, with Ai's strength in this Qingfeng Sea, it shouldn't be a disgrace to you, right? You refused without even considering it? Moreover, everyone in the Cool Breeze Sea knows that I, Hua Xingzuan, treat my godson better than my own. If it wasn't for me, who would be able to reach this stage? When you were in the Central Plains Warriors, you were targeted by the righteous sections. If you acknowledge me as your adoptive father, the entire breezy ocean will be your backup." Chu Xiu said faintly, "Fifth Lord Hua, I've told you that I'm here to cooperate with you, not to beg for help. Besides, I'm not interested in finding myself another father." Hearing this, Nailan Hai and the other two's expressions darkened. What did he mean by finding another father? Chu Xiu's words included all three of them. Hua Xingzuan's patience was running out. He snorted coldly and said, "Cooperate? Could it be that you want to become sworn brothers with Ai? The overseas region is different from the Central Plains. I don't believe in agreements or anything like that. I only believe in my own people. Only my own people. I dare to help them unconditionally, regardless of whether it's a loss or a gain. Let me ask you one last time. Are you really going to reject Ai?" With a chuckle, Chu Xiu turned around and left. Yi Buoxuan could only follow behind him. Hua Xingzuan's expression was now completely dark. He snorted coldly and said, Chu Xiu, if you leave today, you won't have another chance. In the entire breezy ocean, if I don't say anything, who would dare to help you? Chu Xiu stopped in his tracks. Just when everyone thought that he was going to give in, Chu Xiu turned around and said faintly, "One must abide by the rules. If you can't do it, you can't accept the gift. Return my divine weapon's blueprint." A strange expression appeared on everyone's faces. If you can't do it, you want to take back the gift you've given. It seems like Chu Xiu is the one who doesn't care about rules. Chu Xiu, how dare you? Bailey Pobbing snorted coldly. He had long disliked this Chu Xiu. At this moment, seeing that Chu Xiu had repeatedly rejected his foster father, Chu Xiu was definitely not one of them. Therefore, he took a step forward, and the armor on his body carried an extremely violent power. It was like a mountain crashing down on Chu Xiu. Bailey Pobbing was known as the East Sea's #1 general. His physique was the best in the entire East Sea. Even if he was empty-handed, he could still take on divine weapons. After Qiu Tianyao left, he was Hua Xingzuan's #1 expert. Chu Xiu punched with an expressionless face. The true fire of inner force suddenly bloomed, and dyed his body into a bright gold and silver color. With the majestic fist intent of the mountain and sea fist scripture, Chu Xiu's fist smashed down and collided with Bailey Pobbing's fist. With the two of them as the center, a strong wave suddenly exploded, and the formation in the hall was instantly activated. The moment the two fists collided, Bailey Pobbing's expression suddenly changed. A powerful force that made people tremble came. Even though he had used all the strength in his body, he still couldn't resist it. The armor on his body cracked under Chu Xiu's punch, and he couldn't help but step back. With every step back, a big pit appeared under his feet. The whole hall was like an earth dragon turning over. After retreating 9 steps, hundredly broken soldiers finally managed to neutralize that force. However, the armor on his entire right arm had already been completely shattered. Everyone present looked at Chu Xiu in shock. None of these overseas martial artists had seen Chu Xiu fight. Even if some of them knew about Chu Xiu, information was still information, and it was a different concept from the person himself. At this time, seeing that Chu Xiu had forced back the #1 warrior of East Sea, Bailey Pobbing, with one punch, and made him look so miserable, how could they not be shocked? Seeing that Bailey Pobbing was at a disadvantage, Fu Longxiao and Nailan Hai were ready to attack. However, at this time, Hua Xingzuan snorted coldly and said, "Give him the blueprint and let him go." Today was his birthday, and he didn't want to see blood at such a time. Seeing that his godfather had spoken, Nailan Hai and the others had no choice but to stop and let Chu Xiu leave with the blueprint. Watching Chu Xiu's back as he left, Hua Xingzuan looked gloomy. Today was not a happy day for him. He had let Chu Xiu leave, not only because he didn't want to fight on his birthday, but also because he was a little afraid of Chu Xiu. He hadn't forgotten the sun-like radiance on Chu Xiu's body. In fact, if Hua Xingzuan had been more rational today, even if Chu Xiu had rejected Chu Xiu's request to be his godson, he wouldn't have needed to become sworn brothers with him. As long as he agreed to this matter, it would be good to make friends with him. After all, he could see that Chu Xiu would have limitless achievements in the future. However, it was a pity that people changed. If it had been more than 100 years ago, he would have done so. But now, even if he knew the cause and effect, he couldn't put down his pride and show goodwill to Chu Xiu after he had rejected him. This was because Hua Xingzuan wasn't the Hua Xingzuan from 100 years ago. Now he was the supreme of the entire Breeze Sea, the 5th Lord Hua. Being a supreme for 100 years had already changed Hua Xingzuan's mentality. In the past, he was willing to show goodwill to those young elites with limitless futures. Even if he didn't accept them as his godson, he would still show goodwill to them. But now he felt that Chu Xiu had disrespected him. This was something he couldn't tolerate. Of course, there was another point that Hua Xingzuan himself might not have noticed. He had relied on his own abilities to unearth so many young elites. But in reality, this kind of investment required time. He had to wait for them to grow. Hua Xingzuan was already 380 years old. How many more years could he live? Even if Chu Xiu could reach the heaven and earth mystic realm in the future, he probably wouldn't live to see that day. Since that was the case, why would he want to form good karma with him? As for now, with Bailey Pobbing and the others around, he could stay as the supreme of the Breeze Sea until he died. At this moment, Fu Longxiao walked over with a wine glass and said, "Godfather, don't be angry. Chu Xiu doesn't know what's good for him. Why do you have to stoop to his level? Without your help, he would have made a wasted trip to the Breeze Sea. Don't bother about him. The birthday banquet will continue." Hua Xingzuan snorted coldly and said, "This young man doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He has made a name for himself in the martial world of the Central Plains. Does he really think that everyone in the Eastern Sea will give him face?" Everyone else present also complimented Hua Xingzuan and asked him to calm down. After cleaning up, the hall was instantly filled with singing and dancing. Outside the Supreme Island, Ibuoxuan smiled bitterly and said, "Official Chu, you were too rash just now. You offended Hua Xingzuan. We can leave the East Sea directly. If he doesn't say anything, no force in the entire Breeze Sea will help you. Isn't it just acknowledging him as your godfather? That old man's age is there for all to see. You won't lose out if you compromise. If you're not willing, just treat it as using him. After defeating Eastern Qi, don't bother with him anymore. That's all." Ibuoxuan really didn't understand why Chu Xiu was so stubborn. He could tell that Hua Xingzuan really wanted to adopt Chu Xiu as his son. If he agreed, Chu Xiu's future would be incomparably smooth. Who would have thought that he would reject it? Chu Xiu said plainly, "Master Yi, there are some things that I don't think you do. You've also said that acknowledging him as your adoptive father is a compromise. But with my current status, why would I need to compromise? Moreover, Hua Xingzuan, is he worthy of being my godfather? Is he worthy? What a joke." Ibuoxuan thought about it carefully and realized that it was true. Chu Xiu had always been stubborn. Moreover, he was like a master and a father to Wei Shuya. Wei Shuya had even handed over all the connections he had accumulated in the Yinma clan to Chu Xiu. It was as if he was treating Chu Xiu as his successor. But even so, Wei Shuya didn't ask Chu Xiu to acknowledge him as his godfather. Judging from Hua Xingzuan's appearance, apart from his better eyesight, he really couldn't be compared to Wei Shuya. But when he thought about his eyesight, Ibuoxuan sighed. But this old man's eyesight is really extraordinary. Ever since he adopted Zhao Yuanfeng as his son, he hasn't adopted a son for decades. This time he thinks highly of you, Official Chu. It also proves that Official Chu, you will definitely be extraordinary in the future." Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows and said, "Does he need to see this kind of thing? It's not that I'm boasting, but even a blind person can see this kind of thing." Ibuoxuan patted his head. He had forgotten about this. Based on Chu Xiu's current age and achievements, even an idiot would know that his future was limitless. In the past, Hua Xingzuan adopted Chu Xiu as his son. Now that he adopted Chu Xiu as his son, he simply wanted to pick up a ready-made one. The meaning was different. It was simply taking advantage of others when they were in a difficult situation. No wonder Chu Xiu became hostile on the spot. Chapter 10-12. The human heart was the hardest thing to control. If today's scene had happened when Chu Xiu and Chu Xiu were still weak and struggling to survive, perhaps it would have been another story that verified Hua Xingzuan's divine eyes. Unfortunately, Hua Xingzuan only remembered Chu Xiu's age and neglected Chu Xiu's identity and strength, which led to a complete fallout between them. Fortunately, he had been cautious all these years and did not fall out on the spot. Otherwise, it might have turned into a murder case. Anyway, it was not the first time that Chu Xiu had killed someone at a birthday banquet, so he was used to it. Just as Chu Xiu was about to leave, a voice suddenly rang out, "Official Chu, take care." Chu Xiu turned around and saw that it was Pak Donglai who had chased after him. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "Mr. Bo, aren't you afraid of offending the fifth Lord Hua by following me?" Pak Donglai chuckled and said, "At this time, the fifth Lord Hua has a lot of people flattering him. Why would he pay attention to me? And if I was afraid of offending him in the past, I'm not afraid now." At this point, Pak Donglai's expression suddenly turned serious and said, "Official Chu, you want to borrow the power of the East Sea to attack Eastern Qi. But today you've fallen out with Hua Xingzuan. Don't underestimate his influence in the Breezy Sea. I'm afraid this time, you will really return in failure. Chu Xiu said lightly. It doesn't matter. I'll just take it as coming to the East Sea to experience the local customs. Seeing that Chu Xiu was not in a hurry, Pak Donglai said in a deep voice, Official Chu, I won't beat around the bush with you. I agree with what you said just now. Only when both sides benefit is it called cooperation. So this time, why don't we cooperate? Cooperate with what? With a dark look in his eyes, Pak Donglai said in a low voice, You help me kill Hu Xingzuan, and I will help you gather the Jianghu forces in the East Sea to attack Eastern Qi. When he said this, Chu Xiu's expression didn't change, but Yi Buoxuan was shocked. Pak Donglai could be considered as a top figure in the breezy ocean. You could say that he was generous and straightforward, or that he was scheming, but his influence could not be compared to Hu Xingzuan. Who would have thought that he would actually dare to have such thoughts about Hu Xingzuan, who had dominated the breezy ocean for 100 years? His guts were not small. Pak Donglai looked around and said, There are too many people here. Official Chu, my Tianyishui Hall's ship is over there. Why don't we go in and talk? Chu Xiu paused for a few breaths, then nodded and said, Sure. Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Pak Donglai heaved a sigh of relief. As long as Chu Xiu did not leave immediately and continued to talk with him, it meant that there was a chance of success. When they arrived at Pak Donglai's ship, Chu Xiu said in a low voice, Mr. Bo, there is one thing that I am curious about. Why are you doing this? Pak Donglai grinned and said, Everyone wants to climb up. Is there a reason for this? Someone is blocking my way, and he is not willing to give way. So I have to think of a way to solve this problem. Chuckling, Pak Donglai continued, All right, I will not keep you in suspense. Official Chu, I will tell you the truth. I have been wanting to make a move on Hu Xingzuan for a long time. Official Chu, you have not been in the East Sea for long. What you have heard about Hu Xingzuan is all sorts of mystical places. These things are indeed worth mentioning, but you definitely do not know about the rest. Hu Xingzuan's Paragon Island, or rather his Hu family, has already become the scourge of the breezy sea. Oh, Hu Xingzuan wants to dominate the East Sea? Pak Donglai laughed coldly and said, Perhaps he has the intention, but he is old and does not have the energy to do so. The disgusting thing about the Hu family is that they will not directly swallow you up and use force. Instead, they will send a direct descendant of the Hu family to your sect and interfere with your sex affairs in the form of helping to earn benefits. In my Tianyishui Hall, there are already a few places occupied by the Hu family. None of Hu Xingzuan's sons are successful, so he thought of such a disgusting method to find a long-term meal ticket for his descendants. But does he really think that everyone is willing to swallow their anger? Chu Xiu couldn't help but shake his head after hearing this. He did not even know how to describe Hu Xingzuan. Exploiting his subordinates was also very particular, just like what Chu Xiu did in the Northern Yan martial world. I'll take your things, but I'll also give you some practical benefits. I'll let you see what your monthly offerings are spent on. Although the Northern Yan martial world sects are also feeling the pinch, at least they know that the offerings they take out are effective, and the price is clearly marked. That's all. Hu Xingzuan is doing better than Chu Xiu. But in reality, it's like cutting flesh with a blunt knife, and you don't know how much he's going to cut. Hu Xingzuan's actions are simply making things difficult for his descendants. If he dies in the future, if his adopted sons do not choose to protect the Hu family's descendants, the entire Hu family will die a terrible death. Chu Xiu knocked on the table and said, If that's the case, then it's not easy for Hu Xingzuan to maintain the Supreme Island for so long. But I'm still curious. Why did you come to me? You must know that I'm from the Central Plains, and I just came to the East Sea. Is this an impromptu idea? Pak Donglai smiled awkwardly and said, It's indeed an impromptu idea. But if Official Chu is willing to help, the success rate will definitely increase greatly. Also, if Official Chu didn't fall out with Hu Xingzuan, I wouldn't have come to you. The fifth Lord Hu's Supreme Island has been established in the breezy ocean for over 100 years. It's so powerful that it's unimaginable. So I don't even dare to look for someone to work with, because I don't know if they'll betray me. But I'm very confident in Official Chu, because you're an outsider, and you've just fallen out with Hu Xingzuan. With Official Chu's personality, you've basically given up on the possibility of working with He Xingzuan. So here in the breezy ocean, working with Official Chu is the most reliable way. Chu Xiu squinted his eyes and looked at Pak Donglai. This person is indeed the first impression that Chu Xiu gave me. He's very scheming. According to Chu Xiu's guess, this person has wanted to make a move on He Xingzuan for a long time, but he forcefully endured it until now. In the hall just now, Chu Xiu subconsciously saw Pak Donglai. At that time, Pak Donglai presented a congratulatory gift to He Xingzuan respectfully. When he looked at He Xingzuan, his eyes were filled with admiration. No matter when Chu Xiu looked at him, his expression was the same. It's not difficult to act for a while, but it's difficult to continue acting like this. After a while, Chu Xiu smiled and said, I'm very impressed that you have the courage to challenge He Xingzuan in the breezy ocean. I like to work with smart people, and I think Mr. Bo is a smart person. To Chu Xiu, as long as he can get martial artists from the East Sea to attack Eastern Qi, it doesn't matter who the person is. If He Xingzuan doesn't know what's good for him, then I'll just get someone else. Pak Donglai's reputation in the breezy ocean is not small, and it's not bad either. It seems like he has been secretly accumulating his reputation for this day. As long as he can get rid of He Xingzuan's faction, Pak Donglai will be able to take over, and he can also help him consolidate the power of the breezy ocean to attack Eastern Qi. Seeing that Chu Xiu has agreed, Pak Donglai also let out a long sigh. He has been planning this for a long time, and the reason why he hasn't executed it yet is because he lacks strength. He Xingzuan has dominated the breezy ocean for so many years, and he himself isn't worth mentioning. However, the power that he indirectly controls is incomparably strong, and Pak Donglai has no way of shaking it. At this moment, He Xingzuan's power is at its weakest. Zhao Yuanfeng went to the Central Plains to participate in the Central Plains Warriors competition. Coincidentally, Chu Xiu has a falling out with He Xingzuan. Pak Donglai can use this opportunity to get strong support from Chu Xiu and Yi Buoxuan. This is an extremely rare opportunity, so he doesn't care that his plan hasn't been completed yet, and wants to pull Chu Xiu to his side. At this moment, Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, Mr. Bo, since we've already teamed up, let's talk about the power that you have. I don't believe that Tianyishui Hall alone can destroy the Supreme Island. Pak Donglai smiled. Official Chu is right. If I only have Tianyishui Hall, I won't dare to attack the Supreme Island. I'm not that arrogant. Actually, there are many people in the East Sea who are dissatisfied with He Xingzuan's way of doing things. Many of them have already teamed up with me. For example, the leader of the Stormy Waves Alliance in the breezy ocean, Ko Shintong. He was born in the wilderness, and he formed the Stormy Waves Alliance with those small islands. Although his subordinates aren't the strongest, they have the most people. He has a huge grudge against He Xingzuan's godson, Bailey Pobing. He was once heavily injured by Bailey Pobing, and his divine weapon was destroyed by Bailey Pobing. Other than Ko Shintong, Tianyishui Hall has also recruited many experts among the wandering cultivators. Although they're scattered all over the breezy ocean, they'll appear here as soon as they receive my message. Oh right, there's another person that you should be familiar with, Official Chu. He's the leader of the Cetacean Society, Long Tianying. He's also on my side. The Cetacean Society is the largest merchant association between the breezy ocean and the Central Plains, and their trade volume is shocking. In the past, the Cetacean Society had the help of Saint Master Tam Yuan, so they could still get by. But ever since Master Tam Yuan passed away in the Central Plains, the Cetacean Society lost its backing and was suppressed. The Hua family teamed up with Zhao Yuanfeng and seized many of the Cetacean Society's trade routes. They forced the Cetacean Society to become a second-rate merchant association. If it wasn't for Master Tam Yuan's legacy, Long Tianying might even have lost his life. Many of the things in Tianyishui Hall came from the Cetacean Society. We've teamed up to overthrow the Supreme Island. Now that you're here, Official Chu, I believe Leader Long will be very happy to see Official Chu. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.